Evening, everyone. Welcome to a very brief, I expect it to be brief, special board meeting. You have an agenda in front of you. I will call this meeting to order. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve the agenda. Thank you, Trustee Templeton, and seconded by Trustee Lundquist. All in favor? Thank you. We have one recommended action, and I will go to Trustee Barnes for that recommended action.
Thank you, Chair Morton. On April 6, 2021, the Standing Committee considered certain matters in closed session as permitted under the Education Act. I move the board approve the actions and adopt the resolution of April 6, 2021 Standing Committee.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. So you are putting forward the motion that the board approve the actions and adopt the resolution of the April 6th, 2021 Standing Committee.
Correct.
Do I have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Are there any comments? I'm not seeing any hands. Then we will have a vote. The motion has been put forward. All those in favor, and if you could indicate being in favor by demonstrating with that yellow hand, that would be great. Thank you. Those who are opposed? Thank you. That motion is carried. As I said, this was going to be a very brief meeting, and I ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Consider this meeting to be adjourned.
Evening, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 6, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order and begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Are there any changes to the agenda? Trustee Lundquist? Did you have your hand up? No. The agenda is approved as distributed. We'll begin tonight with community presentations. The portion of today's meeting, this portion is dedicated to community presentations on the proposed French as a second language review. I would like to welcome the members of the public watching this portion of our meeting virtually, and those who will be providing the community presentation as well this evening. The Durham District School Board welcomes presentations by individuals and groups at standing committee meetings. We have 8 presentations scheduled for this evening. The board's bylaws allow each presenter a maximum of 15 minutes, including time for questions. In previous correspondence with presenters, we have recommended that presentations contain 5 to 10 minutes of speaking time in order to ensure there is time for questions. Should a presentation go past 10 minutes, the presenter will be notified by a board staff member of the 10-minute mark and requested to conclude the presentation in order to provide time for questions. Presenters are requested to focus their presentation on the topics outlined in their application to present at tonight's meeting. Please note that no decision will be made tonight, but we may ask questions of presenters to assist with future decision making. It is anticipated that this item will be placed on the Monday, April 19th, 2021 board meeting agenda as a recommended action, where the Board of Trustees will have an opportunity to discuss this item and make a decision at that time. I'll call on our first presenter, Mary Cooden.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
We can, Mary. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. First slide. Okay. Thank you, trustees, for this opportunity to delegate. We very much appreciate the work that you do, that your administrators and teachers are doing during the pandemic to support the well-being and achievement of students. So I'm going to jump right in because I know time is limited. So the first slide is about evaluating the French review recommendations. This material isn't new to you. You've seen the framework for French as a second language in your own report, and it is a document that is provided by the Ministry of Education, and then also your DDSB strategic plan. So the key question here is, are the proposed changes to the French programs going to help you achieve these goals? And to us, the short answer is no, they are not going to help with that. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of a context for enrollment and trends in enrollment in French immersion, participation in French immersion in Ontario has been growing at an average rate of 5.6% annually for the last 14 consecutive years. About 12% of Ontario J-K-12 students are in French immersion. So what you're looking at is a day in the life of the Ontario school system. Of course, that is a day in 2018-19 because it takes a long time for the ministry to put out audited data. So you can see that French immersion, the purple slice of the pie, is about 12% of the total student population in Ontario. The DDSB French immersion growth and participation rates are consistent with the provincial averages. And but you have to stop for a minute and think about these numbers. So when we say 5% growth in French immersion, it's within that 12% slice of the pie. So in other words, from 2014 to 2019, the data that I was able to get through Canadian Parents for French from the ministry, your French immersion program grew from 10% of your total student population to 12% of your student population. So that's positive news, but it's hardly overwhelming. And it is certainly pretty predictable year over year. And it is something that you can plan for. Our expectation is that the number of Durham parents seeking French immersion will continue to grow. There's strong community support across Ontario for bilingualism, and there is better access than ever to the volumes of research and best practices in program and design and delivery upon which your French immersion program is built. Next slide, please. Well, that font looks a little wonky, but okay. So regarding the supply, recruitment, and retention of French second language teachers, over the 50 years of French immersion in Ontario, we have gone from no French immersion at all to almost 250,000 students in the program. Having an adequate supply of French teachers has been a cyclical challenge. However, it is a challenge that we have risen to in the past and we are rising to this time. In 2012, we had too many French teachers graduating, and now we have just enough. And that is if boards deploy efficiently and take up best practices in teacher retention. The federal government, noting the issues, is spending $31 million on projects to improve the supply of FSL teachers. This includes everything from work on attracting internationally trained teachers, which has been spoken about in the House of Commons, to professional development modules for principals on supporting French teachers to improve retention. So these are through the Ontario Principals Council, supported by OPSPA. The most common issue heard from parents is the lack of French occasional and long-term occasional teachers. That was certainly noted in your report. However challenging that is, most parents would prefer to have a temporary interruption to French teaching rather than be denied the opportunity to do French immersion for the entire 12 years of elementary and secondary school. And that is what is going to happen if you cap enrollment and cut French time to reduce the need for French teachers. If you look at this diagram, you will note that school boards have a crucial role to play in ensuring an adequate teacher supply. The first circle is oval, I guess, is your responsibility for core, and in your case, French immersion students, to supporting them and getting them through to graduation so they can be the teachers of the future. Then you've got student teachers at your school board, at your schools in the pre-service middle oval in the diagram. And then the application process and FSL teacher support and retention, which are entirely within your purview to work on, to address, and certainly to listen to your teachers. Next slide, please. Okay, what does capping do? We have this divide in Ontario. We have French and English, public and Catholic school boards. So I want to remind you that only charter rights holders can attend French boards. If you are in the majority, non-Catholic Anglophone population in Ontario and you live in Durham, the only possibility of a bilingual education is with the Durham District School Board. French immersion at 12% of the Durham student population is not in danger anytime soon of being a threat to the survival of English programs. Through responsible management of space and community collaboration, it is possible to both grow French immersion and have excellent English programs. French immersion students are your students, and they take up the same amount of space as English students. The capping and lottery process example that is provided in your staff report only tells part of the story. I am very familiar with what's gone on at the Peel District School Board in this regard. The lottery process creates a lot of staff work, not to mention many, many complaints to trustees. Yes, there is some growth allowed in the French immersion program because it grows relative to the size of the incoming grade 1 enrollment group. However, the Peel cap was set at 25%. It seemed reasonable at its inception a few years ago, but it has turned out to be the tool used to turn away hundreds of students from French immersion over the last few years. What you have now in Durham is the best, most caring and fair practice for admissions. Every applicant gets a spot, no winners or losers, no child is turned away, no issues of inequity of opportunity within families. It is just the same as regular English schools, which expand to meet demand and keep families together. It supports student achievement in French. Next slide, please. So considering the impact of reducing French immersion to 50%, what you see in this table is how many hours of French each student gets in the different programs offered across Ontario. So the Durham program falls between French immersion 50-50 and early total French immersion. That would be the bar second to the right. Could use a pointer here if I were in person, but I hope everybody can keep up with me there. So with 100% French in your early years, so that where the arrow is right now, that's French first language. So that's kids that are in the French boards. Okay, then you've got early total immersion, which is the next highest possible amount of French in elementary school. So the current and longstanding design of the Durham French immersion program with 100% in the early years is a quality benchmark for the program. A reduction in French time to 50% will negatively impact student achievement. We have to recognize that English is everywhere. It's after school, it's in our community, it's on the weekend. Most Ontario school boards offer a JK or SK start and 75% or more French in the early years to really get the children off to a strong start. This is based on many years of research, guidance from academic experts, and it surpasses the minimum set by the Ministry of Education in the 1970s. And you should note that that minimum has been hard to move. It's been in place since before any of the research was actually done. So the primary reason stated to support the reduction to 50% French time is to reduce the need for French teachers. And I took a look at the current grade 1 to 3 enrollment. Okay, it's rough numbers. I'm not a planner, but seemed to me it could free up about 67 teachers. And that would be in addition to 349 qualified French teachers that you have that are not teaching French already. In contrast, in 2019-20, as in your report, you were short 5 classroom French teachers and 5 French coverage positions. A reasonable first step in addressing this situation is to fully analyze the data and processes for recruitment, retention, and deployment of French teachers with a view to making targeted improvements that will not negatively impact any students and their achievement in French. And final slide. Next slide. Whoops. Okay. Last one. That's it. Thank you. So what we're asking you to do is to recommit to growing and maintaining unrestricted access to your early French immersion program and improving your core French and French immersion programs. I've outlined a number of actions that you could take, within your school board to make this all come together. we have to be a bit self-reliant. It's pretty obvious these days. Nobody's going to come on a white charger and save you. You got to see what you can do with what you have. So here are some suggestions to you.
Thank you, Mary. We're just at the 10-minute mark.
Oh.
So if you don't mind just providing some
Yep.
concluding remarks.
Yep. So so just want to say that, Durham parents are showing their confidence in public education, in your board, and in your French immersion program by registering for the program. The Ministry of Education and the Government of Canada support and fund increasing student participation in French immersion. Avoiding boundary reviews, or saving, as it says, English programs by denying opportunity for a quality French immersion program is not a justification for downgrading the program itself or rationing access to that program. Teacher supply is a solvable problem. We ask that you build on the great work that you've done on French programs rather than taking a step backwards. And want to thank you for the work that you're doing and hope we can continue to work together going forward. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. You certainly have put a lot of time and thought into that. We'll go to the trustees and ask if there are any questions at this time. Trustees, are there any questions for Mary? Seeing none.
Chair Thatcher, may I be permitted a question? It's a process question.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to know, I hate the word normally, but normally, when you do a written presentation, which you're required to put in advance, it is shared with the public. So Canadian Parents for French submitted a 10-page brief. I can only cover part of it in this presentation. So how do members of the public access that brief? It's not on your website. It's not in your agenda.
Well,
Chair Thatcher,
thank you, Director Marsh.
Thank you. So our commitment to community presentations is that the community then hears your presentation. Trustees do receive written submissions, and if your organization wants to share its product publicly, that is the organization's responsibility. Our responsibility is for you to come to trustees, to talk with trustees in terms of a community presentation. And so we have followed the bylaws in terms of the production of it.
Yeah, my concern is that I've provided information to trustees which is not publicly available through you. So anyway, I would just add then that anyone who is in the audience who would like to get a copy of the detailed presentation could email info@on.cpf.ca and we would be happy to provide a copy. Thank you. So I assume I leave now. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Sherry Govro. Hello, Sherry.
Hi, how are you today?
Very well, and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today. I did put something in and I trust that you can all read. So I wanted to share with you, I come at this as an old woman in hindsight. When I started French immersion, all three of my children went through French immersion. 2 of the 3 graduated from French immersion. And I started on a whim as I went, against my mother's decision. My mother told me I was going to go someplace that bad girls went because I wasn't doing what my kids should have. And as I walked the path, there was, I'm sure I would have been, I'm sure you maybe all heard me at times complain about French teachers and qualifications. And in hindsight, when I sit here today, where I come from is every teacher was qualified. But no questions about it. Might have liked some better than others. Yeah, kids did too. I had, and have told many people, My household and my children was a fruit salad bowl. I had something of everything in there. I had the child who seemed to be great, and even in listening to CPF, my children didn't want to participate in all the time in brownies and Girl Guides and things like that. Why? Because they couldn't communicate in writing in English. And so we dealt with it, because as French, they wrote in French, and when you went, we'd hand in assignments in French as well. So it never happened. My second child, who maybe you would like to hire her, is graduating from U of T as a bilingual French and music teacher. She came to this program every mother's nightmare. In grade 2, she was told she was too stupid to continue. I should pull her out of French and run. And, I didn't. And if I'd given her that chance at the time, she would not have wanted, she could have cared less if she stayed or not. If you asked if she was going to graduate as a French teacher, she wouldn't have done that. She wouldn't even, when she went to university initially, have told you, my dream is to be a French immersion teacher. She came to this because she realized finally that she is a singer, and in singing, she could bring her gifts along with her language. And in all of their opportunities, they came forward with extra opportunities because of their bilingual abilities. One went and studied in France, and one went and taught in Ghana, and then got to go to Togo, where who knew French was the major language over there. And so now they got to communicate with people. Kids are young and malleable. If I had a dime for every time kids dropped into English anytime they wanted in grades 1, 2, or 3, they do that. It's really important to hold that French piece in there as long as they can, because in school is where they get it. They don't always get it. Parents can read in English to them. They learn those things as they teach. As we go through, I think what we need to take a look at is, how we create additional dual track schools. We have portables on site, and whether those portables hold French immersion kids or not, we're rushing through a decision or cutting a program. It's a good thing to have lots of people in a program. Do we need to change how we have and where they come from? Absolutely. We need to do that. When I sit here and I try and use my French, because it is a requirement for some of my employment, I was a core French student. I can read it, not bad. I can write it with a dictionary like no one else. The piece that I struggled with when I really sat in Paris, or when I sit inside of a French community, is speaking, is actually being able to speak and say what I needed to say without sounding like I'm missing some parts of the language. And I'd ask you all, we always have struggles, whether it's not enough teachers or whether it's not enough room. I can tell you, when my kids started, we had the same problems then. There wasn't a classroom, there was not a teacher, we didn't have something here or there. It hasn't changed. I'd like to tell you, we could probably sit here in 10 or 15 years and have the same conversation. As sad as it is, we do need to figure out how to retain. But I honestly really think that these kids need a full French. It is an opportunity of a lifetime in a country where we're bilingual. In places it looks like they're growing far more than 5%. They're not. People are going to move in, they're going to move out. We need to give these kids the opportunity to really see what they wanted. That middle child of mine is going to graduate. She's going to be a French teacher. I'm so excited. My oldest is a French teacher. My youngest got an opportunity to go to Asia. We missed a credit, but she still has her DELF exam so that she can take her bilingualism as we go. It is one of those opportunities we have together. And I ask you to take the time and consideration. And if we're trying to plug a problem, let's fix the problem. Let's not try and work it through in a pandemic As an essential worker, I have a project that was supposed to be done the end of this year. I tell you, I shake my heads. I don't know how you guys do it. As you sit through a zillion Zoom meetings trying to meet with parents 6 feet apart or at a distance as we go, or trying to actually get the tone of somebody from a phone or a Zoom meeting. You know, my project is going to be delayed 24 months. I don't have a choice there. You can't get parts, you can't get other things, but we can take the opportunity that we have to maintain, to save, to work. French parents, I have found, when you ask them for something, they will deliver it to you, whether it's core French or you know, and French immersion. Everybody wants to have the same success. We need to have good core French. We need to have kids wherever they are that they can speak, because in grade 2, you don't realize that you might actually go to Paris as an adult and want to try and order something from a menu. Not ever. But, and then when you get there, and I'm not going to tell you how old, then you just kick yourself, because what you didn't do was take an opportunity that was placed in front of you to learn the best we can. Are we going to have shortages in places? Absolutely. It doesn't matter where we go. But I know we've elected you to do this. You're doing a great job in a crazy world, on top of all the other things that go on in the school environment today, and trying to, you know, sanitize schools and all the extras that get dropped inside the budget. I can only imagine. And I ask you to take the time to take a good decision. You got some short-term pieces, put them into place. We have this as we move forward. And remember, as our kids grow, you never know who's going to be that teacher. If I had been the parent where, you know, not all my kids could go, the one who would not have been there is the one who's graduating as a French teacher today. If I'd been that parent with this crazy world of trying to get to 2 different schools, I can tell you it was lunacy then. I'm sure it hasn't changed for any parent today. You know, there are kids learn. You know, my middle child didn't write or read English until after grade 4. Kids learn when they need to, when you put it in front of them, when you give them good practice and good experience. You need to grow and add other dual track schools, not add them to one of the schools that are there, help balance out a population, places and places that we can do. I could go on all night. You have lots to do, so I'm going to thank you for your time. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. As you have, I'm a hand talker, so what you don't get to see is all my hands tonight.
Thank you very much, Sherry. We're always happy to hear the voice of our parents. I'll ask trustees if they have any questions. Trustees, any questions for Sherry? Seeing none, thank you very much, Sherry, for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Erin McDonald Oldman. Hello, Erin.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. Unfortunately, I know I provided my letter, but I will just be reading it. I'm writing to express my opposition to the proposed changes to the French immersion programming offered by the DDSB. As a parent to an elementary FI graduate, 2 current elementary FI students, and a JK student who I am hopeful will be provided the same opportunity, I am concerned and saddened to read the staff recommendations. It seems like a drastic step back by the DDSB in terms of offering an invaluable opportunity to our kids in a bilingual country. The timing of the report is also very unfortunate given the challenges faced by families in the past year. Certainly more attention might have been paid and more valuable feedback received were families not distracted by the many challenges related to the pandemic and remote learning. Growing up in Ottawa, I was afforded the opportunity to attain a bilingual certificate upon completion of high school, as were my siblings. Fluency in French has played an important role for each of us, whether it be as an asset or requirement of employment or engaging in the bilingual community. Fluency in French is often a requirement of employment across the country. My parents are public servants working in the federal government, and fluency in French is an absolute requirement for a career there. Are we to determine by grade 1 that this will not be possible for our kids due to the fact that they attend school in Durham region and not Ottawa, Toronto, or Guelph? By limiting enrollment, we are effectively limiting future opportunities for our kids at the age of 6 years old. Living in a bilingual country and a world where knowledge of a second language can only be considered an asset, this seems like a very short-sighted decision and the wrong direction for the DDSB to take. I'm also extremely surprised and dismayed by the very low percentage, 20 to 25%, I believe, at which the board proposes to cap enrollment. There are also issues related to equity when only a lottery winning percentage of students are offered an opportunity. The benefits of learning a second language are well documented and include improved academic achievement, creativity, and cognitive development, and the facilitation of learning additional languages, among others. The Ministry of Education and their visions and goals for FSL programming include increased mental flexibility, improved problem-solving skills, a better understanding of aspects of a variety of cultures, a greater awareness of global issues, including those related to the environment and sustainability, and expanded career opportunities as positive outcomes of FSL education. Selecting a small percentage of students to benefit from these opportunities would be to deny the same to other students and families who wish to participate. This does not seem acceptable or even tolerable, especially given demand for the program. Those students who are randomly denied entry to the program will be at a permanent disadvantage as compared with their peers in DDSB who are able to participate, and to students and boards across the country who continue to make the effort to provide fulsome and equitable FI programming. DDSB, as one example, facing the same staffing issues as the DDSB, has recently committed to not only continuing to offer the program to all on-time applicants, but is lowering the entry point from SK to JK. Meanwhile, the TDSB will continue to offer 100% French instruction until grade 4, at which point 1 hour of English a day is incorporated, progressing to half of the daily class time for grades 6 to 8. It seems as though TDSB is rolling up their sleeves as DDSB throws in the towel. I understand the challenges as outlined by DDSB relating to the difficulties in getting enough qualified staff. However, it has come to my attention that in 2019-2020, there were 349 qualified French teachers who were not teaching in French. At the same time, the board was short by 10 qualified staff. The board could be looking to implement measures to rectify this situation and get more qualified teachers teaching in French rather than cutting the program. It should also be acknowledged that significant effort is currently being made to increase the supply of qualified French teachers, as Mary had mentioned. The federal government has announced an investment of $62 million over 5 years to recruit and retain French teachers as part of their action plan for official languages, stating that bilingualism is at the heart of Canadian identity and a major asset in the labor market. The provincial government announced in September of 2020 that it is working to recruit and retain more teachers as well, in addition to new partnerships and programs with universities with cohorts to graduate in the coming year. The provincial government will also be enacting measures to help boards hire a larger number of qualified FSL teachers, including potentially changing regulations to make this easier. In the next few years, the supply of teachers will likely not pose the challenge it does today. Given the investments being made, would it not be appropriate to at least delay drastic action until it can be seen whether the supply of teacher increases, alleviating pressure to deliver the program? It seems like the wrong time to decide that providing FSL to all interested students is no longer worth the effort. In the face of the challenges presented, there must be solutions other than limiting enrollment significantly. Perhaps recruitment and retainment practices could be intensified. At the board level, promotion of a career as a French educator to current students, especially at the secondary level, would raise awareness of the need for such resources and the career prospects for new graduates. Certainly, armed with the confidence of strong employment prospects in an excellent field, more students would make this choice and return to Durham upon graduation. For qualified teachers who are currently not teaching in French, could there be additional training or incentives to increase the pool of FI educators? Or perhaps the board could consider offering a spot to all FI program applicants, but not necessarily guaranteeing school choice, which is the model used by the TDSB. I realize that probably wouldn't be popular, but it may be preferable to not having the option of FI at all. This could serve to ease accommodation pressures on a school-by-school basis and assist in the board's goal of ensuring a viable English program as well. In terms of a reduction in the amount of French instruction, this would have a significant negative impact on the ability of students in the program to obtain fluency. Compared to other boards across the province where the FI entry point is SK or even JK, and where instruction is offered at a much higher percentage than the proposed 50% throughout the primary and junior grades, our students would be at a serious disadvantage. The grade 7 entry point for an intensive program does not seem like an attractive alternative. I question what the demand would be for such a program by either parents or students. At this point in time, students are not likely to be as confident in their skills, and they are more focused on their peers in the upcoming high school years. It is well known that acquiring language at an earlier age is preferable. It is also generally accepted that 10 is the upper age limit for acquiring language with ease, which would obviously be exceeded under the proposed option. As far as expanding the core program, this option would put further strain on an already restricted resource, qualified teaching staff. It doesn't seem as though this would be beneficial given the reasons by the board for capping enrollment. Should the board decide to proceed with the recommendations, we as a family would see no option other than to move our own child to another board to allow her the opportunities that French education provides. However, I truly hope that the board considers that this is not in the best interest of students and families and redoubles efforts to provide the programming. As TDSB and many other boards throughout the province and the country are showing, where there is a will, there is a way. It may be challenging in the current environment to offer the programming, but I feel that we owe our kids the effort. Thank you very much for listening and considering my concerns.
Thank you very much, Erin. And we'll just ask trustees now if they have any questions. Trustees, any questions for Erin? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you. Thank you, Erin, for coming out tonight.
Thanks.
Our next delegate is Brian Hendry. Hello, Brian, and welcome.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Happy to be here. I guess the floor is mine.
I see you're a DDSB graduate and potential parent of a French immersion student.
That's correct.
You can begin your presentation anytime now.
Perfect. Thanks, Madam Chair. And thank you to the trustees for the time this evening. I'm here, I guess, to comment and question the recommended changes by the board that was highlighted in their FSL programming review. And I'm here as Chair Thatcher just mentioned, as a parent who has a child who's about to enter their DDSB in the fall. I'll say I'm a concerned Durham community member about the quality of the local education system, and also as an employer and a member of the business community, understanding that there could be a much longer term impact with respect to the changes that are being proposed. So as Madam Chair mentioned, I'm a product of the French Immersion program and a graduate of DDSB, but I actually transitioned to DDSB from the Scarborough Board of Education in grade 8. So I've had the benefit of seeing the program through two different boards and the transition and the impact that it had on myself as a student coming through. My comments and questions are out of respect and appreciation for the work that's been done by the trustees and the board. I know you guys have been working as hard as possible to provide the best possible education for our children. And in that same light, I'm here to say more work needs to be done to really fully understand what is being asked of the trustees in order to make a fully educated decision. I've had the opportunity to listen to the DDSB Standing Committee meeting held on March 1st. I reviewed the extensive FSL program dated January 4th. I also reviewed the DDSB accommodation plans for 2018 to 2022, which is around trends, issues, and future opportunities. And I also reviewed the trustee submission by the Canadian Parents for French Ontario, which Mary went through earlier. The key findings that were pulled out of the FSL program were noted as the following. Many Ontario school boards are facing persistent challenges to the growth of the FI program and correlating decreases in the English program. And those challenges are commonly related to issues of equity in terms of the demographics of who is enrolled in FI, the shortage of qualified teaching staff, program viability for students in the English program within dual track schools as FI grows in popularity, student success rates and retention rates in FI, and timetabling challenges at secondary schools. Now, when I read these issues, I can really break them down into two separate issues, one being the demand for a product or service, and two being the ability to service and manage that demand. Now, when I look at the first issue, the business side of me struggles to understand why you'd want to move away or turn away demand. I believe Trustee Barrett stated that these programs generate approximately 10 million in funding for the board, with obviously the apparent potential for more. And inserting a cap and reducing participation will only lead to a flat line or stagnation of that funding. Now, I understand and appreciate the comments made around the English programming, and being an English board, this can be concerning. What I don't understand is the following. One, why is FI in such high demand? Is there something missing from the English program? There is some commentary within the documents that is pretty superficial and uses many words such as may, could, potentially, without the strong underlying data to really justify the reasoning behind it. What are we doing to engage and grow the FI program and not limit it? How are we harnessing it to make the DDSB better? And really, how big of an issue is this that we're actually talking about? Now, there's many stats throughout the program and the report. And in my occupation, I live in a world of numbers, and numbers can be great and give you a lot of power and allow you to make some great decisions. But without context, they can be very dangerous. And a few stats I pulled from that October 31st, 2019 enrollment study. Elementary French immersion enrollment was up 115 students from October 18 to 19. That's about 1.6%. Secondary French immersion enrollment went up 248 students. That's about 17% in the same time frame. Now, total board enrollment for elementary went up about 3.6%, and secondary went down 257 or 1.1%. Now, what do these stats mean? Well, it could mean a number of things, but upon initial review, I don't see a major demand issue here, but I'm looking at a snapshot and not a trend. And this is the case with a lot of the analytics that I noted throughout the report. And it really seems geared towards a conclusion and not an objective opinion. The report paints a picture that if we don't cap this issue now, it will have major impacts in the future on English programming. It doesn't, however, map out what will happen if a cap is put in place and the impact it will have on the DDSB as a whole. Will this decrease future enrollment? How does this impact the DDSB brand? And I think from the previous speaker, you heard some of the thoughts from parents with respect to that. Another interesting trend that I noted was that the trustees should consider is within that DDSB accommodation plan, enrollment is actually expected to decrease over the next few years. If enrollment is planned to decrease over the next few years, I'm going to come back to my initial questions and thoughts around capping. Do you really want to slow down an area of demand where you're actually seeing decreased enrollment from the overall student body? When you look at reducing services, it really leads to two things. Either one, a focused approach, which can be very beneficial if you operate in a niche market and can charge a premium for it, but I wouldn't classify public education in that segment. The other thing, and by its own nature, is a loss of customers. And given the anticipated decline in enrollment, the thought of capping demand doesn't seem like a good idea to me and will actually push individuals away from coming to DDSB. Now, when I look at the servicing side, I really feel for the board and trustees here. I mean, the war on talent is real. I feel it in my business every day, and attracting and retaining top talent is a challenge. And as I read further within the report, this really seemed to be the major issue the board faces. My personal opinion is that cap is a Band-Aid solution and doesn't deal with the real issue at hand. There's more than enough qualified teachers. I think we've heard it a couple times tonight. The report stated approximately 350 of them in this very board that are teaching the English program. Based on those numbers I mentioned with respect to enrollment, I would argue that there is plenty of capacity in the system. And I believe this number has been thrown out as well, but if you were able to move 10 of those teachers, I think that would cover more than the need. Trustee Barnes asked a couple of great questions at that March 1st meeting. The first one being done around, what's being done to attract French teachers, to which Superintendent Lazarus listed a bunch of fantastic initiatives. And I think those should continue. Trustee Barnes also asked what is being done to attract French teachers back to the French program. That question wasn't addressed. I think that's something that the trustees should ask the board to look further into. With respect to servicing and managing the demand, the report did not address, why the shortage is there, or really even the context around it. Is this a cyclical issue? Mary mentioned that earlier, that it is. I think this should be assessed. In addition, we should also be modeling out what does this look like in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. The trend analysis wasn't really laid out in the report to understand what these decisions or recommendations would mean. So respectful to the board And for this trustees, given the stats above and the current analysis provided, more work needs to be done here on how we manage and how we would term what we would term as a reasonable increase in demand. I commend the board for the ongoing work in receiving the feedback that they did by going out to the public. And as Trustee Baird had mentioned, the overwhelming response was basically in opposition to this. Now, I'd also say 37 emails is probably not enough feedback to really draw any conclusions. But I also know the trustees have received numerous emails and calls and messages around this matter. And I believe that feedback should actually be brought into this analysis. The proposal that has been put in place also mentions it will be well advertised and will follow the lottery system. Now, as a community member, I like to think that I'm aware of what's going on in my community. I really had no awareness of this, and I've been doing my research with respect to my child's education. I was fortunate to have a few friends that are within the education system who notified me of this and of the proposed recommendations, and that's why I'm here today. If this is what's to be expected from an awareness standpoint for the lottery and the rules that will be around it, I can already see the inequity of this process will cause. In addition, I don't see how a cap in lottery can come remotely close to being equitable. Lotteries are for gamblers. I mean, they're there for gaming. And I don't think you're going to find many parents who are comfortable with gambling with their children's education. So once again, I want to thank you all again for your hard work and the amount of time and energy you've put into this matter. I ask the trustees to either deny this proposal and consider other options, some of which have been laid out tonight, or at a minimum, defer until a greater understanding of what this recommendation really could mean. Thanks again for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Brian. Trustees, we have any questions for Brian? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Brian, for attending the standing committee meeting tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Our next delegate is Melissa Campbell. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Good evening. And thank you, trustees, for allowing me this time to share my concerns. My name is Melissa, and I'm a parent of 2 students who attend a French immersion school in Durham region. I'm also a volunteer with CPF, Canadian Parents for French. I will be reading an email that was sent a few months ago to the school board trustees, and it expresses my opinion on the proposed changes to the French immersion program. To whom it may concern, I received a document from my children's school outlining some plans for changes to the Durham District School Board's French immersion program. I had the chance to review the proposed change options, and as a parent, I have some concerns regarding these changes. One of the recommendations includes significant alterations to the French immersion program. Some of the suggested alterations include capping French immersion enrollment, moving the French immersion entry point from grade 1 to grade 4, and reducing the intensity of French instruction. I don't find these recommendations suitable for English-speaking children who are learning French as a second language. By capping French immersion enrollment, the choice for children to become bilingual shifts from the families to an outside source. By moving French immersion entry to a higher grade level, children are not gaining the early French language instruction needed for future success. Reducing the intensity of French instruction also reduces the opportunity for children to build a strong bilingual future. As a parent of a child in the French immersion program, and as a past student of the Toronto District School Board English stream, I know firsthand that the French immersion system works. I learned French as a subject starting in grade 4 and continuing to grade 11. My older child, who's now in grade 2, French immersion, his French skills are already catching up to what I was taught in school. His French reading skills at 7 years old are steadily improving, and I didn't have this ability until much later in my French instruction. My son's level of French, I expect, will soon surpass my proficiency. I have a younger child who also attends the French immersion school. She's currently in kindergarten and her instruction is entirely in English. My expectation is for her to begin French instruction starting in grade 1. She's already learning a little bit of French at home due to her older brother. My daughter is only 4 years old, but she's very excited about learning French and being able to speak and read in 2 languages, just like her brother. While I understand that there may be some issues to be addressed within the French immersion program, my hope is that the level of French intensity remains the same and the choice to attend a French immersion school remains with the family. I would like for the integrity of the French immersion program to remain intact. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to review my concern.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Trustees, do you have any questions for Melissa tonight? Seeing none. Melissa, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is Sachin Maharaj. Hello, Sachin. Welcome.
Thank you. So I have some slides, I think, that need to get put up. All right, thank you, everyone. So my name is Sachin Maharaj. I'm currently at OEZ University of Toronto. Actually, in a few months, I'll be joining the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Education as a professor of educational leadership, policy, and program evaluation. I mentioned this for 2 reasons. I presented to the board about a year ago on this issue, and at the time I mentioned that 2 of my areas of research interest are school boards and school choice programs and some of the equity implications of the way boards implement those choice programs. But also the University of Ottawa trains more French teachers than any other institution in Ontario, and probably more than any other institution of higher education outside in Canada outside of Quebec. And the issues around the supply of French teachers is a huge issue, not just in Durham, not just in Ontario, but across the entire country. I mean, Francophone teachers at the U of O get recruited almost immediately upon entry into the program from schools all across the country, even as far as BC. So the issues that the board is facing is not just something that's local, it's something that's national in scope. The other thing I should mention is that I myself am a proud graduate of the Durham District School Board. And part of that, for that reason, I've chosen to raise my 4 children here in the board. So I have also a deep commitment to the flourishing of the DDSB as an institution. Okay, so can we go to the second slide? So I want to commend the board in terms of its FSL review. A few of the things that stood out in the report is its commitment to dual track schools going forward. Obviously, the board had established single track schools in the past, but given that it's an English language school board and given the current directions from the province, I was happy to see sort of that commitment to dual track programming going forward in terms of its English and French immersion programming. And it was also good to see sort of a commitment to retaining viable and strong English programs in its schools. Now, the hope is going forward with its ultimately the recommendations that the board adopts, that you can have both a viable English program in DDSB schools, but also equitable FSL programming across the board in terms of FSL for students in the English stream and for students in the French immersion stream as well. I mean, one of the issues that was noted in the report is the significant level of attrition in the French immersion stream. I think it was, the data was by grade 12, by the end of high school, more than half of all students that started in the FI stream have left the program. And so the board needs to ask itself, why is that? What is the reason for that significant level of attrition? And I think part of the reason, which the board acknowledges, is the significant challenges it has in staffing and providing supports in the FI stream, given the unlimited enrollment model that is currently in place. There's a lot of discussion about neighboring boards like the TDSB that have very early entry and unlimited enrollment. But if you look at the attrition stats in the TDSB, they're actually significantly worse than they are here in Durham. And so what I mean by equitable FSL programming is, I think it's sort of inequitable to advertise the FI program to parents the way the board currently does, without acknowledging the challenges in staffing and running the program itself. When you go to an FI information session, everything is very sort of promotional, talking about the benefits of learning a second language, which I think we can all agree are great. But there's a lack of recognition in terms of the challenges students may face once they're in the program, both in terms of the level of supports, the potential quality of teaching apart from the language. Because again, I said this a year ago when I presented, when you're in a shortage situation, like school boards are when it comes to French teachers, you're less selective about the teachers you hire because you just have less choices. You can't be as selective. And so I think all of that needs to be acknowledged up front, and the board should be transparent about that. And by limiting the significant growth in the program going forward, this can allow for a higher quality of education in French immersion for students in the program. All right, can we go to the next slide? So as you know, these are the three options that have been proposed by staff. All involve some level of either capping French immersion enrollment or moving entry to a later grade. The one key part in all three options, which I think everyone should be able to agree upon, is the expanding core French in the primary grades. Again, this is a huge equity issue that the board can address here. Learning French in a bilingual country like Canada, I think, is something that all students should have the benefit of. And so expanding core French into the primary grades will help expose everyone to French as early as possible, whether they choose to remain in the English stream or into the FI stream. Can we go to the next slide? And so, the slide before that. And so the recommended option is to, option one, expand core French in the primary grades, initiate an extended program in grade 7, and sort of cap enrollment in the FI program. Now, this has the benefit of exposing all students to French early and giving an option for more in-depth French learning for those that may not have either chosen to enter FI initially or weren't able to attain entry into the program due to the cap. Now, the thing to note, though, is that these options are sort of possible given the current configuration of schools in Durham. So can we go to the next slide? So as I mentioned, part of what constrains the options in Durham is the fact that we have these single track schools that were established. And again, it's an open question as to whether those should have been established in the first place, given its mandate as an English language board. And given that they were established, whether it makes sense to sort of continue them as single track schools, forever, essentially. Because as noted in the report, it doesn't say this explicitly in the report, but if you only had dual track schools and if you didn't have single track schools, you could actually have more possibilities available to you. So for example, and I just put this up here as an option 4, if you didn't have single track schools, you could expand core French in the primary grades, have the extended French program option, and then move the FI entry point from the current grade 1 to grade 2. In the report, it said part of the reason you couldn't do this, or you may not want to do this, is because it creates enrollment problems in the single track schools where students would have to change schools if they don't decide to stay in the FI program. But having an option like this would seem to combine kind of the best aspects of the 3 previous options, where all students are exposed to French in the early grade, in grade 1, and then they can make an informed decision in grade 2 as to whether they want to try to get into the FI program. And then for students who either aren't admitted or make a decision later, you can have a later grade entry point into extended French. And so I would encourage the board to, try to think long-term and think creatively about what are the ways that we can get the best outcome for both students in the English and the FI programs. And the last thing I'll say with respect to this issue is to just remember that, you can go to the last slide, to just remember that, the school board represents, all families and students in the district, not just the families that email you and contact you, or that even know about, the standing committee and how to present to it. The board has kind of an equity mandate to make the decisions that's in the best interest of all students and families in the board. And so I would just leave you with that, and thank you.
Thanks very much, Sachin. Trustees, any questions for Sachin? Seeing none, thank you very much, Sachin, for coming out this evening, and we wish you well as you move on to Ottawa.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Hilary Beaumont-Brown. Hello, Hilary, and welcome.
Hi there, thank you. Can I go ahead?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I'm just going to read from a letter that I sent in advance that expresses my perspective as a parent of both a current French immersion student, as well as we hope a future French immersion student. So thank you for the opportunity to voice my concerns on the matter of changes to the French immersion program here in DDSB. My name is Hilary Beaumont-Brown. I'm a mom of 5, ranging in ages from 2 to 13. My oldest will finish French immersion in the elementary levels this June, having attended Julie Payette Public School in Whitby, although she's currently, thanks to COVID, at DDSB at home. And she'll continue her French in high school next year at Donald A. Wilson. My middle 3 children, all boys, grades 2, 4, and 6, actually inherited my progressive hearing loss. The first struggled with language acquisition, so although we started him in French immersion, we actually opted to focus on his English language skills because I know firsthand how important it is as his hearing loss progresses for him to be able to focus on visual English language. So we pulled the 3 of them back to our English feeder school. So up until COVID, they attended Sir William Stevenson here in Whitby. My youngest will actually start kindergarten in 2022. It had been our intention that she would pursue French immersion like our oldest, but it now feels very up in the air. We really value the French immersion program, but certain changes, including caps in a lottery system and reducing the number of hours of learning in French in the early grades, are very concerning to us as parents. As a family well versed in the complications of sibling split across schools, especially in the long term, we know how difficult it is juggling 2 or even more schools long term and being able to have a presence and involvement in all of our schools. It would definitely serve to unfairly dissuade many families who would otherwise wish to pursue French immersion if they have to juggle multiple children, some who do get into the French program and some who don't. We believe such suggestions as caps and lotteries work against fair and equitable access to the program. Some of the reasons we as a family value French immersion is currently taught in DDSB. First, a second language increases the brain's ability to learn other languages. This is important for us as our family has deaf and hard of hearing members and are learning American Sign Language, also called ASL. French in particular has proven extremely useful as many words have a French origin. For example, the C hand shape used in the sign to look for harkens back to chercher, which there are a number of such connections between the French language and ASL. For my daughter, this has given her so much more rich access to language and in ASL as she learns it, because French gives her that access. Further, her familiarity with grammar and syntax of the 2 languages, English and French, have proven very helpful in learning a 3rd language, ASL's unique grammar and syntax, which are quite different from English. Not to mention pursuing any further language she may choose to study in the future. This is true not just for our family, but for all students pursuing a variety of languages, not just sign language. As a family who knows well the importance of early language access and how plastic the brain is at a younger age, cutting back French immersion in the early grades does not support the best language learning practices and undermines opportunities to achieve bilingualism. Next, we have seen bilingualism in Canada has proven to be very important for pursuing certain career paths. In particular, there is a significant discrepancy between the number of Canadians that are bilingual in French and English and those who represent us in government that are. Not being bilingual can serve as a significant barrier. Our schools teach our kids the importance of being civically involved and engaged, and we know many potential future leaders of our country walk the halls of our public schools. We therefore cannot limit French immersion opportunities in the public system in the manner proposed, including caps and lotteries. Doing so would unfairly amplify the advantages available to students born into privilege, where private schools along with access to French immersion are more accessible. Further, the job opportunities are not only limited to government, but education and many other private sector industries, as well my husband experienced as a chemical engineer. And learning a second language, let alone trying to achieve bilingualism as an adult, is so much more difficult. The best path to bilingualism is access early to an immersive environment. Our children deserve the opportunity to learn in a robust French immersion program from grade 1. Finally, as someone who myself took core French from grade 1 all through high school, both OAC French credits, which totally ages me, but there it is, and into university, and for whom French immersion was not an option, when I compare my own levels of fluency to that of my 8th grader, there is no comparison, especially when it comes to conversational French. I am grateful for the French I do have, and I do support more French earlier on for all of our students. My cousins in Cambridge had the opportunity as kids to do French immersion, and now one is a French immersion teacher and the other works in media, where bilingualism is a huge asset to him. But for those pursuing bilingualism, pursuing fluency, our French immersion program truly is a superior one, giving so much more access early on to students where it really counts. Where I have a level of proficiency, she has fluency that I believe only an immersive education can provide. These, of course, are just a few reasons of so many that we must keep the program. Benefits to language learning, equality in access to opportunity, and because the French immersion program is currently in place in DDSB is far superior to any of the alternatives suggested. Our kids are worth it. We are so proud of the French program we have here in DDSB. This is not the time for cuts, lotteries, or caps. I hope my youngest gets the rich French immersion experience, and I wish I had had that my oldest currently is experiencing. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you so much for your time and for your care for our students and for your consideration into this matter.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Trustees, is there anyone who has a question for Hillary? Seeing none. Thank you, Hillary, for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, So trustees, our last delegate is not here, is not with us. So Hilary was our last presenter. So on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I'd like to thank all of our delegates for offering their perspectives with respect to the Durham District School Board French Program Review. The DDSB always welcomes presentations from our parents and from the community. Just a reminder that the decision will not be made tonight, but this item will appear on the April 19th board meeting agenda. So back to the agenda. 6 from the community presentations to DDSB presentations, and we'll begin with Superintendent Jack Negro, Elementary Mathematics Plan.
Through you, Madam Chair, the report is before you. Thank you for the opportunity to present some of the work we have done this year in elementary mathematics. Obviously, this year has created unprecedented challenges for teacher professional development in mathematics in the same year that the new math curriculum was introduced. Notwithstanding this, the work continues in different ways, and you will hear about those in the next 7 minutes or so. As you listen to this presentation, please know that we are planning forward to think about gaps in our students' learning caused by the pandemic and how to address them. We are thinking about the possibility of summer programming, and we think about the full implementation of the math curriculum in the 2021-22 school year. I'd like to now turn it over to Education Officer Linda Ford DeCuna and our special guest tonight, curriculum facilitators Deepa and Aaron, and Principal Sharon Knights, to guide us through our brief presentation.
Good evening. The Durham District School Board Elementary Math Plan reflects a strong commitment to human rights and equity and is founded on a belief that all students must see themselves reflected in the curriculum, their physical surroundings, and the broader environment so that they feel engaged in and empowered by their learning experiences. To ensure this happens, our key initiatives and priorities embrace culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, which recognizes that all students learn in ways that are connected to background, language, family structure, and social or cultural identity. With this focus on human rights and equity, much of our system support this year has centered on 2 areas: the beginning implementation of the new elementary math curriculum and virtual teaching and assessment in the DDSB at home campuses. The new elementary mathematics curriculum has introduced a number of significant changes and additions, which have informed our board plan. In addition to notable content shifts across grades, several new skills and strands have been introduced, and key examples of these changes are noted on the slide. Due to the scope of the changes introduced in the new curriculum, it is recognized that a multi-year plan will be necessary to support a successful system implementation. The new social and emotional learning strand is one strong example of placing human rights and equity at the center of all we do. Our central team is currently collaborating with the Ministry of Education to co-construct professional learning focused on ensuring a bias-free approach to teaching and assessing social and emotional learning skills. In addition, we have our central team has engaged in professional learning conducted by the research of Gillian Perec, which studied the role of implicit bias in the assessment and evaluation of learning skills. This new learning our central team has engaged in will inform system supports moving forward as we strive to ensure a culturally relevant and responsive approach to social emotional learning.
The Student Achievement and Curriculum Department is working collaboratively with central departments to provide responsive and differentiated professional learning opportunities at the school and system level. Through a weekly system communication, resources, updates, tips, and after-school professional development sessions have been shared. Being responsive to the shift in PD due to the current situation, on-demand videos highlighting various new content have been created, along with supporting materials, including Blackline Masters, helpful websites, and sample lesson clusters. To honor school-based needs, flexible support has been provided through the school-based facilitator and ready-to-use staff development presentations on various topics that school leaders can select from according to staff needs. A report card comment bank was also created to support educators during this reporting period.
Sharon, are you there?
Sorry, I had my mic off. Sorry.
Go ahead, Sharon.
In being responsive to staff and in collaboration with our literacy and numeracy facilitator, Deepa Gohill, we were able to be responsive to staff needs, inviting Deepa to be a part of our staff meetings to go over what was the same and what was different in the new math curriculum, as well as reporting on the new math curriculum. We invited Deepa to work with each grade team from grades 1 to 8. At each of these grade team meetings, teachers were able to work with Deepa to get a better understanding of the changes within their grades, as well as the change to expectations on reporting, moving from reporting on all 5 strands separately to reporting on the strands in a more wholesome way, including now the social emotional piece of mathematics. After working with Deepa, teachers again expressed that they would like to meet with her again with their grade teams. When Deepa and I looked at each of the grade teams and what they were most concerned about, it was made clear that each grade team wanted to know about coding and how to teach coding to their students. Deepa has reached out to staff to offer lunch and learns and continues to offer to meet with staff virtually. She has had some success with staff reaching out to her to plan virtually, and we continue to remind staff that she is available to work with them.
As educators in our virtual campuses shifted their pedagogical practices to accommodate virtual teaching, the ways in which we have offered support for professional learning in mathematics have also shifted. In order to ensure that virtual educators were receiving timely and differentiated support, we've offered a wide range of learning opportunities for our virtual teachers, including on-demand instructional videos, weekly office hours, after-school professional development sessions, sample schedules and lessons, as well as weekly communication through our curriculum currents newsletters. Topics have included planning for a virtual balanced mathematics program, shifting assessment practices to accommodate virtual learning, and accessing and implementing digital tools and platforms to facilitate teaching and learning across the mathematics curriculum. One of the digital platforms that has received significant traction with educators across the DDSB is KnowledgeHook. This highly engaging Ontario-based platform offers opportunities for direct instruction and purposeful practice from grades 1 through 10.
No audio is being played. Your audio is turned off for presentations.
Superintendent Negro, is there a narrative that goes with this PowerPoint, with this part?
There is. It's a screencast, but Erin, can you get the volume to work? It's a narrated short video.
In the top where it says options, you'll have to enable audio sharing for video.
Are you able to do that, Erin?
Sorry, I see share sound up in the top. Would that?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Knowledge Hook allows educators from grades 1 to 10 to select warm-up activities, instructional tasks, assessment pieces, and practice questions from a bank of engaging, curriculum-lined content. Teachers utilize the game show feature to run whole class instructional lessons through an engaging, game-like format. Missions are assigned to students for purposeful practice opportunities and can be differentiated to allow students to work at their current level as well as at their own pace. As students work through their assigned missions, teachers receive data highlighting trends in student responses and indicating areas where gap filling or intervention may be required. Teacher supports are provided, which help educators anticipate misconceptions and provide suggested tasks for areas of intervention. Across the DDSB, there are nearly 2,000 educators actively using the platform this academic year, with 53,313 student accounts created so far this year. Knowledge Hook is just one example of the types of digital tools and resources that have been provided to educators across the board to help engage students in meaningful learning for mathematics. Knowledge Hook allows educators
With culturally relevant responsive pedagogy at the forefront, our department will maintain our priorities of supporting implementation of the new mathematics curriculum and effective practices for virtual mathematics instruction and assessment. We will continue to be responsive to system and school feedback and data as we plan for the remainder of this school year and as we look ahead to the 2021-22 school year. This concludes our presentation this evening. We are pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Trustees, do we have any questions for Superintendent Nigro and the presenters? Go ahead, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. I don't need to know the top 10 key changes in the new curriculum, but I'm really curious to know, are we getting back to basics in math? What, in your opinion, are the major changes?
So I'm happy to answer.
Go ahead, Linda.
Sorry. I'm happy to answer the question about the back to basics. 2 years ago, the ministry introduced the fundamentals of mathematics, which placed an emphasis on number sense and operational sense as a priority for our province. That is still very prevalent in the curriculum, and number being it's one of the key strands. Strand B really pulls in that emphasis on mastering basic facts, on literacy with basic facts, and understanding key concepts of number. To talk about the key changes, there are some significant changes in this curriculum. There are new skills such as coding, which has never been in the mathematics curriculum before and is extensive from grade extended from grade 1 to 8. There are new skills such as mathematical modeling, and there's a number of other additions such as the financial literacy strand and social emotional. So there's quite a number. The ministry has acknowledged that this curriculum will take approximately 4 years to implement effectively and close the gaps that have been caused by this current curriculum as content has been pushed down into earlier grades. There's some big shifts.
Perfect. And I do have one comment. I think we can look forward to having those monthly updates. Am I correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, we do publish trustee updates on a regular basis that highlight some of the work that we're doing in math and other subject areas. So please look for those. We will continue to provide those.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. Trustee Edwards, go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. This is more of the financial implications. You talk about the costs for the digital tools, and I'm just wondering, with the new math curriculum, were additional funding provided for the actual resources? Does that include the licenses for that? For things like Knowledge Hook and Gizmos and so forth.
Linda, do you want to start on that, and I'll end with a few comments?
Yes, the ministry provides grants specifically to the implementation of curriculum and for the math strategy supports in the system. Some of that, there's parameters around this, how that funding can be utilized. This year, some of that funding can be earmarked towards digital tools and resources, as well as classroom ready resources. So there is a potential within the funding for these tools to be purchased through ministry earmarked funding, specifically enveloped for the math strategy and for the math curriculum implementation.
Trustee Edwards, through the chair, we struggle with really scoping out these resources and try to assess to what extent they are used by our teachers in our schools. And so after some initial trials, then we are faced with the question of which resources teachers are using. We don't want these things to sit there, pay for them, and not be used. The other interesting thing that we're seeing is some very low cost trial periods, followed by some much higher cost contracts that companies want to enter into with us. And so we're trying to be very strategic in terms of how we bring these tools on. The biggest difficulty is to introduce a tool and then take it away from teachers. So again, all of this requires some thinking, some strategy, some negotiation sometimes. And so we're continuing those discussions.
As supplemental, if I wish, and I appreciate trying to scope up tools, and it is hard to take tools away when there's an uptake as far as usage is concerned. The ministry also does some licenses around tools, etc., provincially, where is any of these tools under that licensing agreements or not, or can it be somewhere if other boards are using it for a quantity of scale?
No, these tools are not under ministry license, which makes it particularly tricky. And so those are ongoing discussions in terms of scoping out which are most appropriate for our use.
And if I may add, trustees may recall last year through the budget process, we did flag for you that programs that had been previously funded by the Ministry of Education, they stopped that funding and then provided boards a small grant in comparison to what they had provided previously in terms of providing the access. So we did have the tough chore of working through with educators via survey and whatnot, and had to cut access to some programs and try to continue to fund the programs that were most highly subscribed to.
Thank you, Director. Trustee Lundquist, go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you. So I hope that my question isn't really offside, but I'm very curious about this in terms of math curriculum, perhaps because of experiences in my own home. So we're required to implement this new curriculum in the midst of a pandemic. And I have heard from others as well that this problem is not unique to my home. So I don't think I'm kind of calling my own child out on this, although I am a little bit. So we noticed a pretty significant gap in math knowledge from last year that was missing and required for this year, that had to be remediated. And so we were very fortunate that we were able to provide him with resources to do that, but not every parent has that capacity. And so I'm wondering, have we created sort of specialized programming or access to specialized programming that would give teachers and parents and students the capacity to fill that kind of gap of lost knowledge that I think is more common than we're willing to acknowledge? And I don't mean us as a board, I mean as a province and perhaps a country and maybe worldwide in light of the state of the pandemic.
Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Lundquist, we don't have access to pre-formed curriculum to address gaps. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we know that those gaps exist, and that will be a priority for us as we move forward coming out of the pandemic. We are having discussions even now to talk about how we will address those post-pandemic. And by the way, teachers are addressing them now during the pandemic as well. They're trying to address them the best they can. Every student's or class gap is different. And so we rely on the professionalism of our teachers to address those as they are diagnosed and put our students in the best position moving forward. So that is a significant part of our work moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Barnes, go ahead, Patrice.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I'm very impressed by the things that are in this report, and I'm going to ask the questions around. One, I'm glad that we're measuring and we're coming back with. We have a matrix by which we're measuring this, so we'll continue to keep an eye on it, which is fantastic. My question is around one, what exactly is the social emotional learning? Like that seemed very, to me, they're not a solid mathematical concept. So I wanted to figure out what that would look like in a classroom.
It's for you, Madam Chair. Trustee Barnes, I actually anticipated this question from someone. So I wrote all the elements of the social-emotional learning strand down, and maybe we'll all learn together about this new strand in math.
Okay.
That admittedly has raised some concerns to the point where the ministry has asked for a pause in teachers assessing these socio-emotional learning skills, but they are identifying and managing emotions, recognizing sources of stress and cope with challenges, maintain positive motivation and perseverance, build relationships and communicate effectively, develop self-awareness and sense of identity, and think critically and creatively. So those are the skills that are in the curriculum document. 4 or 5 months into the year, we received a memo from the ministry asking us to pause on the assessment of this strand because there was concern about the kind of presence of bias, potential bias in the way these things were assessed. Just a few months before, the curriculum team met with Professor Gillian Perrick from York University on bias within the learning skills on the report card. So we had a bit of an inkling that these might be problematic. And so we actually had Dr. Perrick in to work with the team on some data that she collected and how learning skills, at least, manifest themselves to be somewhat biased as they are evaluated. So I hope that was helpful in outlining some of the ideas behind the social emotional learning strand.
Well, I think it's, sorry, Nora, I see you're there.
Sorry, Trustee Barnes, do you want to finish and then I'll just add to Superintendent Negro's comment?
No, you'll probably answer my next question, so you can go ahead.
I'm not sure I will, but I did want to say Superintendent Negro is being very modest. I think in terms of the work we've done within this district in equity, the team immediately identified some concerns with the curriculum. As you know, we received the curriculum very late before it was to be implemented, and so there wasn't a lot of opportunity. We immediately identified for the system that we were going to pause implementation prior to any direction from the Ministry of Education, partially because we were in the middle of a pandemic and they were receiving the curriculum very late, but also an opportunity for us to analyze and the implications. And so I would suggest that Superintendent Negro and team have been leaders within this province in terms of identifying some of the challenges within the potential bias within that particular strand.
Okay, thank you. I was a little worried about that because it did seem very subjective, those particular learning skills, right? There's nothing quite measurable about them. So thank you for that. My other question is, so as we talk about online learning and going back to in school in September, and I'm seeing great skills in regards to the training in here. Are we looking at how we are going to sort of integrate that into the on-site? I'm assuming that our on-site schools are doing this work as well, but I'm just wondering if we're looking at how we strategically place people that have been trained here in our school system once we go back to in-class learning.
I'll try an answer and then invite our other presenters. I'm going to say particularly Deepa and Aaron, who have worked with some of the DDSB at home teachers, to reflect on your question, but we're seeing uptake of various online learning strategies across both DDSB at home and our in-person schools. So we expect that the collective knowledge of our staff across the system has really improved in this area. And we expect that we're only going to grow even more. Deepa and Aaron, do you have any comments, or Linda?
I'll just add something quickly and then I'll invite Deepa and Aaron. Because we've pivoted we had the stay-at-home order, and we pivoted in January back to stay at home. We very promptly provided supports for who would be brick and mortar educators to ramp up and be ready to effectively provide instruction virtually. So we've given professional development supports for the even brick and mortar educators so that they can do that quick pivot to online learning. And that we did that as well last year during distance learning, which we found to be very effective. The tool that Aaron highlighted tonight, Knowledge Hook, is something that our board has invested in for several years now. It's not a new tool, and that is a tool we've supported in use in classrooms in brick and mortar settings. And so that is a very adaptable tool that it can be used for DDSB at home as well as brick and mortar. So a lot of the tools that were shared on that slide that Aaron provided are actually effective both in brick and mortar and in DDSB at home and in virtual. So I'll just invite Aaron or Deepa if you want to add anything to that.
Or Principal Knights.
I think our teachers in our virtual campuses are from across the board. And when they are redeployed back to their schools, they will be dispersed at schools throughout the board. And they will certainly take their learning back with them. But I will say, like Linda has mentioned, I mean, I have seen such incredible gains in our educators in brick and mortar schools. And, you know, many of them are just as proficient now with technology tools as our virtual teachers are.
And I'd like to just jump in and say that when we do go back to the virtual teachers coming back into the brick and mortar schools, I think as principals, we have to do like a needs assessment as to, you know, who needs what, who is comfortable with what. And I think when Deepa and I worked with the grade teams in our schools, that gave us a good gauge as to, you know, what did people need, what did they feel comfortable with, and what were they really struggling with, so that we could help them move forward in their teaching practice.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and for answering my questions. Appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. I'm seeing no further questions, so I'd like to thank Superintendent Nigro, Linda, Deepa, Sharon, and Aaron for the presentation tonight. Moving on in the agenda to item 6B, DDSB at home secondary update with Superintendents Nevels and Davis.
Good evening. Tonight we bring a presentation to accompany the DDSB at home secondary information report that can be found on pages 6 to 15 of your agenda package. The report outlines specifics in terms of the development of DDSB at home secondary throughout this school year, as well as the professional development and community building initiatives the school has engaged in. Included also are data related to student achievement for quadrimesters 1 and 2 for both DDSB at home and in-person schools. I would now like to introduce DDSB at home secondary principals Allison Van Bainham and Peggy Perkins to outline other initiatives the school has engaged in.
Thank you, Superintendent Nevels. DDSB at Home Secondary gives students an amazing opportunity to engage, connect, and learn with students and teachers from all over Durham region. But our team also recognizes that our students are learning while experiencing a global pandemic. And for that reason, we intentionally focus on success through well-being. Good evening. My name is Allison Van Bainham, and I am the principal of the junior campus of DDSB at Home Secondary. Our junior campus has 1,015 grade 9 students, 1,157 grade 10 students for a total of 2,172 students. We have a teaching staff of about 134 teachers and 12 educational assistants who are shared between both campuses. We provide courses for all pathways. We also support English language learners and include and support students in the school support program who are cross-enrolled from in-person schools. In the virtual school, we work hard on making connections for teachers, students, and parents, and provide continued support for achievement and success through the work of our guidance and inclusive school services teams, who meet weekly with grade level administrators to discuss student progress, well-being, and concerns and goals for student improvement. This year, our educators have participated in a number of formal professional learning opportunities which have focused on well-being. These included sessions on building community in the classroom, anti-Black racism with Dr. Nicole West Burns. And we have also engaged in professional learning to improve our understanding of assessment in the virtual classroom, as well as a number of ongoing informal and formal opportunities on technology at the point of instruction. Finally, as part of our support for student well-being, our school provides a wide variety of extracurricular groups. So far this year, we have hosted a Spirit Week, a virtual talent show, and we will be sharing a vocal recital as well as a play in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Peggy Perkins, the principal of the senior campus. In grades 11 and 12, we support approximately 2,000 students and 135 staff. Throughout DDSB at Home Secondary, we focus on student success and supporting student achievement. We have developed targeted intervention programming to support and re-engage our students in our virtual learning environments. We offer credit recovery, SAL, inclusive student services, guidance, and student success re-engagement support teachers. This year at DDSB at Home Secondary, we have over 830 potential grade 12 graduates heading to a variety of post-secondary destinations. We are very proud of our achievement data shared in the report, showing our students achieving in line with students studying in person and many thriving at DDSB at Home Secondary. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and I'm a student senator for the DDSB at Home students.
And my name is Amrita and I'm also a student senator for the DDSB at Home students.
Welcome to the DDSB at Home campus. In this video, we'll be sharing resources and tips on how you can be successful while learning online.
Start here on D2L Brightspace on that tile right there. It's going to take you to D2L. You can go to your class from there. If your teacher happens to be using Google Classroom, that's what that'll look like. And of course, on Google Meet as well. Along with doing your classwork and assignments at DDSB at Home, there's going to be some sites that you're going to have to look at just for information about the school and what's going on. And this is one of the key ones here. Now, if we were in a physical school building, you'd hear your morning announcements over the PA each morning. But here in a virtual school, We don't have a PA, so we have to use a site called our virtual morning announcement site. So you can come on here, you can see what schedule it is, what week, and this is where we post our VMA show, our virtual morning announcement show each morning. You can see a couple here already from this week, so you click on that at the beginning of block 2, and you can get caught up on different announcements and things that are going on with DDSB at home. Another place you can also look is our news feed page, and it's meant to be kind of a Twitter or Instagram feed, if you will. And every day we feature a different club or group that we have here at DDSB at home. And finally, another key place that you can go for information at any point is our DDSB at Home secondary website. And there's a bunch of things that you can look at on here. For example, if you're having any issues with technology, you can look at Chromebooks, best practices. There's all sorts of links on here for family and students, library learning commons. But one last thing we wanted to show you, DDSB at Home Secondary is on social media as well. So you're looking at right now our Twitter account. Okay, you can click follow and give us a follow there, and you'll see different information on here. And also too, we are on Instagram. So here's just a look at what that Instagram page looks like. Of course, you can give us a follow on there.
Get involved. Make the most of your online learning experience by joining some of our virtual clubs. We have something that caters towards almost everyone. For example, some of our clubs include Virtual Informed Black Educate Students, also known as VIBES, GSA, STEM Club, Fashion Club, Book Club, Fitness Club, Young Philosophers Club, and so much more. So if you're interested in any of those, go to your grade level Google Classroom. Click You Can Join Clubs, and then you can find meeting times and updates all from there.
If you find at any time you need help either academically or with your mental health, help is only a click away. Every guidance counselor hosts open office hours on Google Meet during lunch. Grade 12s is usually Thursday, grade 11s on Wednesday, grade 10s on Tuesday, and grade 9s on Monday. You can make appointments yourself and figure out what time works best for you. Lastly, we also have Mindfulness Mondays where you can go to do guided meditation or yoga.
By following these tips, you will not only learn new skills, but make friends and excel in all of your classes. Good luck!
Thank you to both Allison and Peggy and the entire administrative team and the teaching and support staff at DDSB at Home Secondary for their leadership this year with the implementation, development, and growth of our secondary virtual school. We know that the foundation they have created will serve us well as we begin the task of envisioning what secondary virtual learning may look like for the upcoming school year. I will now ask Director Marsh to close off this evening's report.
Thanks. I just wanted to say in the winter, trustees did ask for a report specific about secondary virtual. We had done a report previously on elementary virtual. So the timing of this report is somewhat coincidental in terms of where we are in the year. And I do want to echo and commend all of the staff at DDSB at Home, both elementary and secondary, for really trying to build community during a trying time. For our students and their families, as well as our educators serving in the in-person schools. The challenges are different, but I think what this presentation demonstrates is that regardless of where students are learning, our staff have really committed to the relationship building and the lens of well-being during the pandemic. So I think there is a lot to celebrate in terms of the way they've pivoted and created for the year. We did update you last time in terms of secondary registration for virtual. We are going to be communicating with families for next year. While we have not received specific direction yet from the Ministry of Education about whether or not we're going to be directed to offer virtual, we anticipate we will be, given the fact that the pandemic will still be lessened, we hope, in terms of intensity, but anticipate that there will still be a need for virtual learning next year. We have shifted about because it's going to be a central model again for secondary. The course offerings in terms of the workplace pathway specifically have increased. And so we will be communicating with all secondary families again tomorrow to make sure that they're making their decision. They've already done it, made a decision. We're just making sure that they're aware that it's a centralized model again, and aware of the course selections in grades 11 and 12, which have changed slightly. So wanted trustees to be aware that that communication will be going out. Following the April break, we will then begin the process in terms of finding out in terms of elementary families, their interest next year in a virtual offering, so that we can then build this into our planning, both from financial budget perspective in terms of decisions that the trustees will be making, but also in terms of staffing and timetabling. Our labor groups have committed to a slight pause to allow us to get this input. We've tried to delay as long as possible, but staffing does need to happen, and we've been appreciative of their flexibility in terms of the pause on staffing, but we really do need to move forward at this time. So there will be something going out to elementary families following the break.
Thank you, Director Marsh. I see Superintendent Neville's, we have a couple of questions. I'll go first to Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. I just want a clarification on the statistics on page 10 of the whole package, or page 5 of 8 of the report. Because it does make the statement that the achievement results will also include those IIP are consistent with past achievement, including 2018 and 19, which is a non-COVID year, I believe. We've been in this so long, I can't remember what is what. But I'm just, so you're saying that these achievement rates are the same in a non-COVID year?
Yes, so they're very similar. So for 2018, 2019, the average mark was 74.3, and the average mark for 2019, 2020, the average mark was 77.5. There are several factors that come into play this year where it makes it difficult to compare the data compared to semesters and quadmesters and all the other factors that come into play.
Okay, and just, you know, one of the comments around, you know, commend staff, and the only thing I see that is the remediation that is required at the DDSB at home. There seems to be, you know, it doesn't seem a lot, but that is a lot of more intensive staff resources around remediation is required on the difference between in-person and DDS at home. And then it would be interesting to see the statistics, especially when it comes to and the difference between a person with an IEP and not an IEP. If you're looking at the difference, it's almost, in some cases, almost double where the remediation is required with a person with an IEP. So that is significant staff resources, as I can see, around remediation. So I know staff is working really, really hard to ensure that students get, but that's a lot of additional support that is required to continue to achieve the same results. All right, at least that's how I'm reading it.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Chair Morton, go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, and through you. First, I have a comment, and I'm looking at 4.2 in your report, the virtual clubs. I am commending you for including those extracurricular activities, because in my opinion, it's those activities that bring many of our students to school every day. That's how they thrive. So thank you for those virtual clubs. But my question is in regards to the rate of absenteeism and lateness. So there are consistently greater numbers of students absent and late from Durham at Home. Does that concern you? And if so, what can we do about that?
So most definitely, that is a concern for us. And one of the challenges that we have faced, and feel free, Principal Perkins or Principal Van Vanum to weigh in as well. It's much more of a challenge for us to find those students that have disappeared completely, especially when our only outlet is a phone call or an email that sometimes is not responded to. And it's much easier to do those check-ins with students when they're in the physical building, when they're seeing those teachers, and those teachers can check back in. So I know the team has done a lot of work and have put some specific staff in terms of that reach out component to try to reconnect students back to the program.
I'll just add in here as well that with a lot of our students that have chosen the virtual option for this year during COVID, we are supporting as best we can with a lot of mental health issues and balancing COVID, education, depression, anxiety, loneliness. We find that as we are continuing in the year, we're seeing some of those issues and the disengagement getting more and more. So that's why we have a team of teachers mobilized to re-engage, to support, to offer that caring adult and that connection. Even though it's virtually, we're doing that reach out so that they have that connection at home.
Further to your comments then, do you think we have greater mental health issues with students studying virtually as opposed to students in the classroom?
If I may, Superintendent Macaulay, I'm not sure if you've broken it down in terms of the source and whether or not you're able to comment on that question.
Through you, Chair. So the team is looking individually at students and trends. So I don't have at my fingertips the difference in our referral rates, but we do know they're up both in person and with DDSB at home. A couple of the strategies that we're also putting in place, again, complements the DDSB at home secondary team in terms of student success, as well as the partnership for inclusive student services. We've added 3 additional social workers specific to this time frame to the engagement strategy to draw students back in, but individuals who are regulated health professionals, knowing that intersect with mental health complexities as well, because we want to make sure that we're connecting. As Superintendent Neville said, it can be challenging, but we want to be our most creative and innovative in trying to listen to the students, find out what's going on for them in their whole experience, including their learning, and then be mapping a plan forward. So we keep adding those layers as we listen to what our students need. But we have recently added 3 additional regulated health professionals to specifically support the engagement of students who are DDSB at home elementary. We see a cluster at the grade 3-4 level there, and DDSB at home secondary, working with both campuses.
Thank you very much for all of those answers.
Trustee Barnes, go ahead, Patrice.
Thank you. I see the, I'm very encouraged by the things that, hold on. Sorry. I'm very encouraged by the things that I'm seeing in regards to students. I'm echoing, but I'm hoping that some of the things that we have here, we'll look at some of the best practices that we have here that we'll implement back into schools. The opportunity for not just to access guidance counselors at school, but online, I think is a great initiative that I think would probably translate as well into when we go back to in-class learning. So I'm just hoping that we'll be looking at that, taking our best practices and including them as well.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Thatcher, we're definitely doing that analysis. And in fact, a lot of these practices are occurring now in the in-person learning because, of course, our in-person learning model has a virtual component to it. And so we think that as we move forward to a primary in-person model again, that there's an opportunity these practices will be embedded because people will see how they were successful during this period.
Thank you, Director Marsh.
Thank you.
Superintendent Nevels, I just had a question with regards to what we've referred to as lost students, students who haven't stayed with their courses or with the program. And I'm just wondering if that is accounted for somewhere in your data.
It would be accounted for within the data in terms of potentially remediation required if they had failed courses, but would also be included partially within the attendance report. It's not spelled out specifically, but I know the school works very hard with the homeschools as well to help to try to reconnect with students that may not be attending classes as well. To see if they would be better off suited back at the homeschool within an in-person learning environment.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing no further questions, so I'd like to thank Superintendent Nevels, Superintendent Davis, Peggy, and Allison for your presentation. Moving on to item 7 in the agenda, Director Marsh for the Director's update.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Thatcher, wanted to provide trustees really primarily updates connected to COVID. One of the things that you may have heard in the media last week was the Ministry of Education identified that they would be introducing new safety protocols following the April break. We have not received anything in writing yet in terms of what they're going to be directing us to implement next, the Monday following the April break. But we did have an opportunity to get a verbal briefing, and from the sounds of that verbal briefing, the strategy will be directing us to do screening at the elementary level, similar to what we do at the secondary level, where students go on to this self-assessment screening process, work their way through it, and then submit their successful self-assessment. The challenge we have at elementary, of course, is that 5-year-olds are not going to go on and do a self-assessment in terms of screening. It would be the responsibility of the parents. And so then the question will be in terms of communication with the parents around that self-assessment tool. Our elementary staff are already doing an incredible job in terms of when there are visible symptoms, communicating with the family immediately and confirming whether or not it's allergies or if in fact the child should be at home pending a COVID test. So we're not really sure in terms of, we're thinking this may just be a paperwork extension of what is already happening in elementary schools, but until we get the written direction, not completely clear on what will be expected, but did want to let you know because there was some media in terms of enhanced safety measures following the April break. I also wanted to let you know that we've been engaged in a number of meetings, both with Durham Region Health Department and the senior officials from the Ministry of Education, to ensure that we were very clear on what we're seeing in Durham. And so I am going to take this opportunity just to update you in terms of what, we're seeing increased numbers provincially, and certainly Durham is no exception to that. So over the last 2 weeks, we've gone from having no school closures due to COVID to 7 schools as of today are currently closed due to the COVID outbreaks within the school. Our overall cases today, we were at 138 active identified COVID cases today, compared to 2 weeks ago when we were at 67, and 3 weeks ago we were at 30 cases. So really what we've seen is that cases over the last 3 weeks have increased by 4.5 times within our schools. Schools with cases, we've seen an increase there over the last 3 weeks as well. 3 weeks ago, we had 22 schools with cases, and we're now up to 51 schools with cases across the district. So the number of schools schools with cases has increased just to slightly over double within that period of time. In addition to having the 7 schools closed, we have a number of classes or cohorts that have been closed over the last 3 weeks. So if we go back 3 weeks ago, we had 10 classes who were sent home for a period of 2 weeks. And today we have 95 classes. So an increase in terms of the number of classes being impacted and going to remote learning. In terms of as a region, and these statistics were provided to me by Dr. Kyle, the medical officer of health, in one of the meetings that we, interactions we had over the weekend. Right now, in terms of weekly cases rate per 100,000 individuals by region, Peel is at 8.6% positivity. Toronto is at 7.1. York is at 6.4, Durham is at 6.1, and Thunder Bay is at 5.1, and the average for Ontario is 4.7. So the purpose behind the meetings that we've been holding is to ensure that they are recognizing that currently Durham is above the provincial average and the impact it is having on our school system. I also want to say that I had previously indicated to you the concern we had around operational needs within schools as teachers needed to self-isolate and the shortage of supply teachers. And this is a provincial situation. We have worked very hard to continue to add to our emergency occasional teacher NDA list. We also implemented a plan immediately in terms of reallocating all central staff to schools, as the priority was to keep schools open. So all of the statistics I've provided for you this evening, not one of those is due to not having sufficient staff in place. We have not had to close down yet a classroom or a school due to lack of operational staff. These are all specifically connected to COVID-19 cases within our schools. So wanted to flag that for you. We recognize that the province is concerned in terms of seeing this third wave, and certainly we have seen in the last 3 weeks an escalation in terms of cases within our schools. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Crawford, you have a question? Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I was just thinking in view of the escalation, even when you compare the numbers with the rest of the province, why are we still open? And who decides when we should close down, the board or the regional health?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Thatcher. There are 2 authorities who can close the district down in terms of a contagious disease. One is Durham Region Health Department, the Chief Medical Officer of Health there, the Medical Officer of Health there, or the Ministry of Education. So in the conversations, my understanding with Durham Region Health Department is that they are monitoring very, very carefully. They are concerned about the impact when we close down in terms of mental health and impact on families who don't necessarily have childcare. And so in the conversations, they're looking at that part of it as well. The province has articulated that schools will be the last to close and the first to open during any decision making. And so in conversations with the Ministry of Education senior officials, they were very clear that the province wouldn't be looking to close the school system down. We do know that in some regions, the local health unit has made the decision, but not in Durham.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Just moving on to Trustee Lundquist. Go ahead, Nikki.
So I'm asking your indulgence, Chair Thatcher, because early on in the meeting when you were asking for amendments to the agenda, I lost all sound and I couldn't actually seek an amendment to the agenda. So I had previously sent around a motion that I would like to put on the agenda. So I'm hopeful that the members of the board.
Yes, I did see that in the I did see that in the chat. And I understood your item would be on the agenda, item 8 under recommended actions, and I will address that shortly if you would just give me a moment.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Forbes, go ahead, Darlene.
Thank you. Director Marsh, thank you for the update. And I know that we've all received lots of emails of concern and phone calls of concern from parents who are concerned about, staying open for this week between the Easter and the April break. I mean, the numbers that you've laid out are they're very concerning. So I'll wait to hear the motion. But I appreciate the update.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. I'm seeing no further questions, so I'm moving on to item 8. As Nikki just mentioned, because of some of the challenges that we have experienced in our Zoom meetings, we've had technical difficulties at the beginning of the meeting, and Trustee Lundquist did lose the audio. We normally would have an item here under recommended actions. So trustees, I'm asking if there would be any objections to us adding that item to the agenda at this point. Seeing none, so I'll call on you then, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. So I'm not going to preface it with a lot because much of what I had written was actually referenced by Director Marsh with updated numbers. I'm just going to observe that I think the motion is somewhat urgent because we are in this really dynamic and very rapidly changing environment. So we've heard about the transmission, the number of closed classes in schools, and generally the rise in cases. And I'm just going to also observe that they are also with respect to variants of concern. So we know that other public health units have closed schools, and our public health unit at this stage has not moved to do the same. Also that the Ministry of Education has indicated that schools will be the last place closed, even as some epidemiologists and doctors are saying workplaces and schools are drivers of community transmission. So if our public health unit is not closing schools, I think it is incumbent on us to do what we can do, what is in our power to do, which is somewhat limited, I acknowledge. But I think there is something we can do, and accordingly, I'm going to move the following motion. I move that the DDSB, through its chair, immediately correspond with Dr. Kyle and the Durham Public Health Unit, imploring them to prioritize the immunization of school staff and staff engaged in the direct transport of students, and that copies of that correspondence be provided to the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health, and the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province of Ontario.
Trustee Lundquist, just wondering if there are any questions. We have a motion on the floor. I was just wondering, Trustee Lundquist, did you consider possibly, instead of school staff and the others that you mentioned, that we could possibly use the term education staff?
I did consider, can I respond to that, Chair Thatcher?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. So I did consider it, and I actually rejected it as an option because I actually think that may mean that more people than frontline staff working with children and facing exposure would be prioritized for vaccination. So with no offense to Director Marsh, her, for example, people who actually don't carry that same risk.
Okay. I see Trustee Crawford has a question. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I'm trying to anticipate some of the arguments that we're going to get from the ministry, and I guess we've heard some of them already today because they seem to be under the impression that we're at a 98% safety situation. I would like the wording in there, maybe another sentence, to emphasize the workers with the special education children. Just in case they set aside one part of it, maybe they would do the other part. In other words, add them as a high priority if the wording could be changed to put emphasis on them.
Thank you. Director Marsh, did you wish to comment?
Sorry, I just wanted to ask whether or not it's helpful to you if we put the motion as it's currently worded up on the screen, just so that everyone's
Yes.
really clear on what the motion is. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I believe that Trustee Templeton also had a question. Go ahead, Scott.
It's not. It's actually not just a question. It's more. I mean, I agree with this motion 100%. We believe we have to get our front staff vaccinated, and because that is actually, if you look at everything, NORA's numbers back everything towards, or the numbers that NORA got from the Ministry of, from the Health, back everything that we're fighting for, which is the safety of pretty much everybody in our school system and our students and anyone that our students are related to. So I get what I'm saying is I agree with the motion, and if it does need a seconder, I'd be happy to second it.
I was just going to ask you, can I assume then that you're willing to second the motion?
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Templeton. So we have a motion moved and seconded up on the screen here. Wondering if there are any questions. Trustees, I'm not able to see the little hands at the moment, so maybe if someone can see those, or if you could just call out.
Madam Chair.
Any further comments? Trustee Crawford?
Well, my comment was to put some emphasis on the staff directly working with the special needs students. They're closer to them physically and more opportunity for transmission there. I don't see that in here.
I'd like to make a comment in support of that as well, because it was the comment from the Minister of Health today, who also expressed a concern specifically around those education workers who have been in our special education classes who are unable to work from home and have been, I believe, Director Marsh, I believe they have been unable to work from home throughout the whole last year. So I would fully support something being added to the motion.
We're putting it in for track changes, but I think the motion maker would need to verify whether or not that's a friendly amendment.
And regardless, point of order, whether it's a friendly amendment or not, it should be treated as an amendment. Yeah, because it's no longer owned, because it's already been seconded. You have to have a formal amendment. So, so then we need a mover and then a seconder of the amendment.
Well, I'll move the wording
Crawford,
that's there now, and maybe the chair would second that.
I'll second that.
So chairs are seconding motions now in our meeting.
I know we're chairs are seconding motions now. Would you like to second that motion?
It is committee, don't forget, it's a bit looser.
Yeah, well, we shouldn't even be seconding it, Paul, if we're gonna go on that one, but anyway, just.
Trustee Crawford has moved this and looking for a seconder. And I'm sorry, I can't see hands again. If you were willing to second that, would you call out? No, we don't have a seconder.
We don't need a seconder.
We have in a standing, Trustee Crawford always had seconders, and I understand what you're saying about it being a committee, but we're trying to be consistent with that.
Okay.
So we'll go back then to the original motion. So we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
I had my hand up, Trustee Thatcher.
Oh, thank you.
I know.
I'm sorry, I can't see the hands.
I know that. So
happy to have your comments or questions, Trustee Barrett.
Yeah, I know Nikki's got her hand up again as well, just so you know. So it's there as well. So
thank you.
As you know, in some of the conversations, I philosophically don't disagree. It'd be pretty hard to be able to talk about the numbers and not want to advocate in order to be able to ensure that our staff are given priority. Because as I don't disagree with the comments made that we're trying to be able to make sure that our staff is protected. I just, philosophically, it's hard to agree. And some of my family members go out every single morning and go into classrooms, and some of my grandchildren go into schools as well, and also participate in the classes. But I guess I'm just having difficulties in being able to understand that if someone takes priority, someone has to be removed from the priority list. And as animal farm, all animals are created equal, but some animals are created more equal than others. I'm still having difficulty understanding. It's a motion that you can't oppose because it's philosophically and fundamentally correct. But I recognize that if there is priority given to one group, that means another group has to be able to yield because there isn't enough vaccines. I mean, I work in the food industry. I recognize that the Minister of Education and the Premier of the province says schools are going to be the last ones that are going to be closed. But I know from food processing plants across this province, they aren't going to close either. So I'm not, so again, I'm kind of rambling a wee bit because it's hard to argue this, but someone has to yield. Someone has to give up a spot because there isn't enough vaccines to be able to go around. So I'm not going to oppose it, but I'm just saying that the reality is there's a broader question here that talks about the mismanagement, the lack of coordinated efforts, and I'm sure I can't solve all the problems of every single government that have failed in order to be able to ensure that the broader society is protected. But it's hard to philosophically oppose, but the other guy in me that deals in the other industry sees many individuals that have to go stand shoulder by shoulder, don't have the ability to be able to not to go to work, don't get paid if they don't go to work, and aren't getting vaccines as well. And they're in other industries, whether it's in healthcare or whether it's frontline or whether it's other elements. There's a lot of people that aren't getting the vaccines, and how do you prioritize? As a Durham School Board trustee, I want to make sure that my schools and our students and our staff are protected. But it's how do you balance out against one group against the other? So it's just a philosophical dilemma.
And just a couple of points to add to that. We still have 30% of our 80-year-olds and over to vaccinate. And the other point is that to this point in time, 50% of people who've been offered vaccinations, healthcare workers, firefighters, paramedics, have refused to have a vaccination. Well, one might argue that with the new variants and the issues we're dealing with that Director Marsh mentioned, that perhaps that will change. I'm going to go to, I don't know who came first in here, but I'm going to go to Trustee Forbes. Go ahead, Darlene.
Thank you. Emily, I appreciate the philosophical debate. I think that we are school board trustees and we can, outside of this role, we can write letters to our MPPs and the Premier and the Minister of Health, expressing our concerns about the vaccine rollout. I think that's all fine. I think what we have in front of us are escalating numbers that are frightening, and really I feel compelled to act and support this. And I really think it's quite an important motion.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't disagree with Trustee Barrett, and I did want to speak to this because my role in life is advocacy on behalf of workers, and so I recognize that choices are being made, but I don't know that those are our choices to be made. But I do think it's incumbent on us to really say this is a priority group of workers that you need to look at. The Chief Medical Officer of Health and the provincial table are going to decide how the rollout happens and where they put them in the priority. And I don't think there's anything improper about saying this is a group you really need to consider in light of the fact that you're saying they're so essential that they're the last thing to close. And I actually agree with Trustee Barrett when he says we know that they're not going to close food processing, they're not going to close grocery stores, they're not going to close those things. And people who work in those industries absolutely deserve to be vaccinated as soon as possible. But so do our teachers. And if we are not going to give them the option of online learning, then this is something that we should be doing, in my view. And so I'm really, I feel really strongly that, I don't want to position this as a group of workers against another group of workers. It is really a question of, we are looking at what I think is going to be a sea of disability claims and WSIB claims in light of the fact that we're so determined to keep the schools open, especially as they're talking about schools being drivers of community infection. And so to me, I recognize the practical challenges of it, and I recognize that a party is going to have to balance that, but I think seeking a rebalancing of it in the current situation is responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Moving on then to Director Marsh. Go ahead, Nora.
Thanks. I'm not sure if this adds to the conversation or not that you're having, but I thought I'd best share it. Part of my conversation with Durham Region Health Department was definitely about immunization for staff and what their plan is. We know that they are part of the next phase. Education workers have been identified alongside many other employee groups. And at the time, it was things like people working in restaurants and whatnot were added to that list. One of the things I did mention to to the senior team at Durham Region Health Department, as well as the Ministry of Education, is that we do have an opportunity. Durham Region Health has the capacity to do our staff within less than 1 day if they had access to the immunization doses. And we do have an opportunity to really do it efficiently during the delayed March break, which will be taking place next week. So I did want to just flag in terms of the conversations that I was having both with the Ministry of Education and Durham Region Health, that I identified that window as an efficient and effective way, given that they have identified that we're heading into that group of people where educators have been identified. We're not quite there yet, but my understanding is within the next week or so we will be. So it's where they fit within that April to June phase, because they've identified they will be part of the second phase, but it's where in that April to June. So I don't know if that helps the conversation or not, but did want to clarify that that was Durham Region Health Department's response. They think they have the structure to do it within a day, but they don't have access to enough doses at this point, was the comment.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Crawford, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to support it because it will draw some attention to it. To be honest with you, I cannot understand why anybody would be opposed to the minor amendment I made, simply because they're going to prioritize this in the long run, and they would come as a higher priority than general staff. So can someone explain to me why they think putting that sentence in there destroys this motion instead of strengthens it?
Trustee Lindquist, go ahead.
I didn't think it destroyed the motion. I actually just thought it might be a bit confusing, frankly. So the reason I thought that was because all kinds of staff in schools work with children with special needs. So there are EAs, there are ECs, and I think that's who you're referring to, but teachers work with students with special needs. Support staff of all kinds work with students with special needs. So my issue around it was just a lack of clarity, frankly. I think there are other groups as well within the priority set, like, within the group that might need a priority too. For example, kindergarteners who aren't masked, those teachers are more exposed as well. So I just thought I was uncomfortable creating a hierarchy without understanding the dynamics of that hierarchy, Paul. So to me, that was my thought.
Well, the clarity could have been strengthened with a bit of word changing. Anyway, I'll support.
And I think it was the Minister of Health did say today that she was concerned because those people in the special classes did not have the option of working at home, whereas kindergarten staff does. I thought that was what was clear. Go ahead, Director Marsh.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Peel decision, the Peel's Health Unit has actually closed down all the special education classes as well, which is different from what happened previously when the province closed down school systems.
Okay, we have a motion moved and seconded on the floor. We seem to have no further questions or comments. So I would ask for anyone who is opposed to that motion. And I'm seeing none. The motion is carried. Moving on in the agenda to item 9, under information items, a call on Superintendent Elmhurst and Hamid for an Indigenous student achievement data presentation.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. The report can be found on page 16 to 22 of your package. The purpose of this report is to share with the Board of Trustees achievement data over time for students who self-identify as Indigenous. At the February board meeting, we shared a presentation outlining student census results and indicated throughout this presentation that students who identified as Indigenous had the greatest disproportionality of outcomes. However, due to small numbers, analysis of this disproportionality was not included in the presentation. The infographic provided on pages 21 and 22 of your package highlights the achievement trends experienced by students who self-identify as Indigenous over the past 6 years. Indigenous peoples have expressed concerns about the use and possible misuse of personal information. Such concerns are rooted in historic and ongoing experiences involving tracking and reporting on Indigenous peoples by governments and their organizations. We do not take these experiences lightly, and we have a responsibility to ensure that the data collected serves to inform our practices as a system to identify, address, and eliminate anti-Indigenous racism, discrimination, and barriers to success.
It is important that we recognize that the education system has its foundation in Eurocentric thinking and assimilation practices that have historically disadvantaged and continue to disproportionately and negatively impact Indigenous students. Each and every Indigenous student brings unique gifts into our system and into our schools that we must honor, respect, and integrate into learning experiences. Since 2007, the Durham District School Board has been providing the opportunity for voluntary self-identification for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit students to inform responsive and relevant programming. As highlighted in the infographic, we can see that over the past 6 years, there has been a steady increase in the number of students who self-identify as Indigenous, from 957 students in 2015 to 1,827 students in 2020. Currently, we have 2.5% of students in the Durham District School Boards self-identifying as Indigenous. We also see within the infographic that elementary students who self-identify as Indigenous have a lower achievement levels than all students, with an average of a 13% gap in reading and mathematics and an average 16% achievement gap in writing, as reported on Term 2 report cards. In addition, we see an average 20% graduation gap between Indigenous and all DDSB students over the past 7 years. Our responsibility as a district is to respond to this data by engaging in anti-colonial actions and culturally relevant and responsive programming that upholds Indigenous inherent rights, centers Indigenous voices, histories, and truths. We have highlighted within the report some key commitments we are making as a district to Indigenous students and families to address these disproportionate outcomes and imposed systemic barriers. These systemic responses have been co-created in partnership with the Durham District School Board's Indigenous Advisory Circle. This report has been shared with trustees for information, and we welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, Trustee Barnes.
Go ahead, Trustee Forbes.
Sorry, I was after Trustee Barnes. Sorry. She can go first. I don't want to.
Well, as long as someone goes first. Go ahead, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I was just looking at the Indigenous coach and lead, and notice, I just wanted to talk about that. Was that funded separately by the ministry? Is that something that that is fully funded? Have we taken advantage of it? Do we have any data on it as yet?
Yes, so the Indigenous Education Lead is a fully funded position. Every board has to have one full-time lead, and that funding comes through our BAP funding. We also fund the Indigenous Education Coach, which really focuses on some of our secondary pathways, transition supports, graduation supports, and that's funded fully through our Indigenous Board Action Plan funding as well.
Okay, so how are we using the Indigenous Coach right now? So do we have that? Are we implementing that?
So currently the Indigenous Education Coach is supporting primarily secondary students, although also elementary as well, focusing on transition supports, as well as specialized programs for Indigenous students. The Indigenous Coach currently monitors attendance data, achievement data, connects specifically with schools to co-plan and to co-teach responsive and relevant programming, to work on breaking down systemic barriers. They're also currently working with our secondary English teachers to plan and prepare for the launch of grade 11 NBE, which will be starting in the fall.
Okay. How long have we had that particular position in place? I'm just wondering if we've seen any uptake or success with that already.
It was previously funded through Student Success, and it was called a re-engagement teacher. And the role was primarily to reach out to Indigenous students, support engagement back in schools. That was how it originally started. That funding didn't continue, but we were able to continue to fund the position through the Indigenous Education Board Action Plan. And we've continued with that model. However, we found that one person going in to have conversations with students wasn't necessarily changing that trajectory. That what we know is we need to change the way in which students engage in schools every single day, and that one individual can't necessarily be that bridge. So the role is shifted to support educators in schools in ensuring the program is culturally responsive and relevant. We also have worked with our local First Nation to create alternative programming for some Indigenous students that are struggling to connect within our schools currently, that has proven to be extremely successful.
Okay, thank you.
And Trustee Forbes.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So I feel very privileged to sit on as the trustee representative on the Indigenous Advisory Circle, and to meet with our our partners. And I'm in terms of the process of decolonizing our education system, and really rooting this in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, sections 25 and 35, and UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of, the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is so powerful. And I think the reaction from our partners has been quite, it's just wonderful to be a part of. So I'm glad that we are able to measure, and will continue to measure as we implement these things. And I'm just very grateful to be there. So, miigwech.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. Seeing no further questions, I'd like to thank Superintendents Elmhurst and Hamid, and move on to what appears to be Associate Director David Wright's section of the agenda tonight. Item B, calling on Associate Director David Wright for the draft trustee expense policy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Trustee expenses were discussed at the January board meeting when the annual report highlighting trustee expenses was brought forward for information. A number of items were discussed in relation to trustee expenses, and at that meeting, staff indicated we would review the policy and regulation and bring a revised draft policy for trustees to review, and a revised procedure for comment. The review that we undertook included a jurisdictional scan of trustee expense policies, a review of the relevant section of the Education Act, as well as a review of the Ministry of Education's trustee expense guideline. It was apparent from the jurisdictional scan that there was little consistency across school boards, and it was apparent from the review of the relevant section of the Ed Act, as well as the trustee expense guideline, that the established policy and regulation were not out of line with the requirements. With that in mind, much of what was included in the regulation has been moved to policy to remain under trustee purview, and outside of a few clarifications and updating of concepts, the rules generally remain static. The draft policy and procedure are included with the report this evening, and through you, Madam Chair, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Barrett, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions, if I could. You had referenced that we had gone forward with being able to report expenses quarterly and online. Where does that appear in the policy, David? Did I miss it? Or should that not be in the policy or procedure? Probably the procedure, but I'm open. Should that not be included in the policy?
Yeah, absolutely it is, Trustee Barrett. And if you give me 1 second, I will find the reference.
Okay, because I couldn't find it, David.
So if you look in the policy document, item 5.2, for the duration of a trustee's term in office, their expenses shall be posted publicly on the Durham District School Board website on a quarterly basis.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate that. I did miss it, so I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Couple other comments. Under 5.44, it talks about OPSPA expenses. No doubt, David, I would obviously attract to those. It says 2 annual public school board meetings association. There are, and I understand we're talking PES and we're talking the AGM. Right. However, the language might indicate that only those 2 would be paid for. I know that there is discretionary under 5.4.5 on professional development sessions or conferences, provided the attendance has been pre-approved by resolution of the board in public. like there are meetings, for example, Central East regional meetings that we might get mileage for. The way I interpret this is I would have to come to the board to be able to attend a Central East regional meeting. So I'm just, and maybe I'm mistaken. I don't want to create more red tape than we need. I want to obviously have accountability and control. Sorry, just a screen here. But just wondering about that element. First, I think it could be claimed under discretionary.
Right.
But it's a mileage that you're going to a meeting. So where does it fall into the scope? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem at all. My first highlight will be that I think that certainly the intention wasn't to change anything. I think this language actually is carry forward language verbatim from the regulation. So the intention wasn't to change anything.
No, I understand. But when you give it back to us and we read it again, then we find other things. So
okay, so I would think that if trustees were elected to represent OPSPA, the mileage in the procedure would probably apply. The mileage rules in the procedure. Let me scroll down just a sec.
Yeah, because I saw something with regards to OXTA.
Yeah, OSTA-ACO.
OSTA-ACO, sorry. Yeah, not OXTA, that was a Freudian slip. So, but it wasn't kind of the same language for trustees.
Yeah, fair enough. I would say it is not as clear as it could be, though I would suggest that if trustees vote on the committees that you are representing DDSB on, a resolution has been made to participate in that.
But just to clarify, David, there's regional meetings that take place like 3 times a year, and every trustee on the board could attend.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily based upon your elected position. It's based upon an interest on whether or not you want to attend. I'm just trying to determine, do I need to come to the board to be able to get approval to go to that meeting? Because it's outside of the 2 annual OPSPA meetings. So I'm trying to make sure that what we don't create is this parade of an agenda item saying, okay, I'm going to this meeting and I need to be able to get approval, etc. So
may I jump in and just clarify under 4.4 section 3, travel for board business will be eligible for reimbursement. Does that not cover trustees' attendance at OPSPA events because it is board business?
4.4, what page is that? Because
I'm on Appendix C.
Oh, you're on Appendix
Sorry,
C. Okay.
I went to track. Yeah, I was just madly searching for it.
Yeah.
So it was Appendix C, page 34. So it doesn't include, I think it was covered, what I'm wondering is it would be covered under board business.
Okay, as long as there's an understanding of that's the case, because to me it was a little clearer for student trustees than it was for us. So my other question is then, and I know this has not changed either. I'm just, again, I may have missed it as well, David. So because there was quite a few pages here. So who approves the chair and who approves the chair and the vice chair expenses? I know how it's done, but where is it reiterated in the policy? I see the chair under Appendix C 3.0, 3.1, 3.2. The role of the Associate Director, Corporate Services, the chair and the vice chair. Did I miss that one, David, as well?
Excuse me, and make sure I'm not on mute. You know what? That doesn't ring a bell, Trustee Barrett. I apologize. I'm not sure if we've highlighted here the approval process for the chair and the vice chair. So I think that's a pretty good catch.
Okay, so if we could just include some language with regards to that, because obviously, as chair of the audit committee, I don't want the responsibility coming according to the ministry guidelines. That's for sure. So
fair
that
enough.
was
So yeah, that was just point taken on both of those items, and we'll work to clarify them for you. Thank you.
That was the other element, and I know, my last point, Madam Chair, is I know that policies, for example, are typically done every 5 years for review. I would just say that with this policy, it might actually make sense that it's done at least once a term, because technically you could go through a whole term without reviewing it. And I think it's actually a good educational piece as a reminder. So I was just going to say, if we made it 4 years, then at least every board, the 4 years, is going to at least look at the policy once. That was only my suggestion.
Point well taken. Thank you.
And that was it, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Back to the speakers list. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I didn't have the same thing with the OSPA thing because it was under conferences and workshops where the Central East meetings are meetings. So I took it that way. As far as that was concerned, I thought they were both covered off. My issue is around 5.4.3, just some clarification, because again, it's just the way I'm reading it. It sounds like the preferred communication tool, if you wish, is a cell phone. And then if there isn't appropriate cell phone coverage, the person can get, a trustee can get a landline. And that's the way it comes across to me. It's as far as that's concerned, and I don't know if that was the intent. Because it says, a cell phone shall be provided, and then further down, later on, it says it says if a cellular coverage is not available, then a trustee at the trustee's primary residence and the cost of a dedicated telephone line. So it sounds like cell phones are preferred and a dedicated, and I don't know whether that necessarily should be dictated in the policy. I don't know.
So I think that's a good point, Trustee Edwards. I think that is the direction that we were heading, that communications would be supported by the board. But in the way things are going, cell phones are primarily used, and it also mirrors how the board supports staff expenses. So this is your policy. It's in the policy, and an item absolutely open for discussion, debate by trustees.
I just don't care. Personally, this is just a personal note. I don't care to carry 2 cell phones around because that's the way we've been talking about it, is that there's also a preference. I know there's an item there, but there's a preference that we use board cell phone only for board business, a separate cell phone for board business. I know that's not exactly stated there, but I prefer that because our landlines are in our houses, and actually I usually don't. Most people know that I don't answer my cell phone, and because I'm usually either driving and I can't really necessarily pick up sometimes, or I'm in a meeting. So I prefer my landline because it's the easiest way people to get a hold of me, and they can get me at night because it's in my house because we don't have offices. So I don't know if other trustees kind of agree with that or not.
Donna, through you, Madam Chair, I haven't had a landline.
Chair Morton, excuse me, Trustee Barrett, I'm going to call on Chair Morton. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, and through you. I just want to respond to Donna's remarks about the cell phone and the landline. Yes, I'm in agreement with Donna. I prefer to use my landline for board business. My cell phone is my personal cell phone. Thank you.
Thank you. And Trustee Barnes?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify back where Trustee Barrett was talking about in regards to the OSPA pieces. So when you're elected to represent OSPA, you have a lot more expenses than just those 2 and your conferences. I mean, right now we're online, which is great. We don't have expenses. But we used to have that where we had to meet, the board of directors meet. And I just wanted to make sure that we were covering that because it wouldn't fall under the 2 annual pieces. So were you clarifying to say that if you're elected, to that committee, then your expenses are just automatically covered when you submit them, and it doesn't necessarily fall into 2 annual pieces?
So Trustee Barnes, that was my train of thinking. However, Trustee Barrett's point is well taken. So I'll review the OPSPA piece. If trustees are elected to represent DDSB, how we ensure that the trustees don't need to go come for our approval every time they want to go to a meeting. And if there are other meetings that all trustees are able to attend, that the resolution isn't required for them all to attend and claim mileage. So I've got a little bit of work to do in that piece, but I think I understand your point. Happily we'll address it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Barnes. Trustee Barrett, do you have something to add? No, nothing. I'll go to Trustee Lundquist. Go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. I just think we're unnecessarily complicating this. I think that it does. I think it is all captured in the policy. So either conference or meetings or mileage or while on board business. I mean, nobody's going to OPSPA because it's a cool place to hang out. They're going there because it's board business, in my view. So, I mean, I think the understanding is there already, and it may just be easier to just add a footnote at the end or some such thing instead of redrafting all of it. That's all. Because I agree, it should be covered, but I think it is by the policy.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Associate Director Wright? Seeing, oh, David?
Apologies, Chair Thatcher. I'd love just a little bit of clarification. I'd like to provide a little bit of clarification on the cell phones, that it would be our preference to provide trustees with cell phones from the perspective of anything.
This is how I'm pulling it. Just in case it slips out.
Sorry, Margaret, you slipped off mute there. The trustees can be subject to FOI. So in discussing with Council Cotter, he suggested that if DDSB provides a cell phone for trustees, then we would cover the cost with the same life cycle that we provide cell phones to staff with. But that if it is subject to an FOI, it is a business phone. So that was the preference there. However, the language in the policy totally allows trustees to purchase and maintain their own cell phones if that's required. But there is the issue that Trustee Edwards raised about a landline. And so the way that the policy reads right now is that the board will pay for a landline if cell service is not available reliably at your residence. So just want to make sure everybody's aware that that is the intent of the policy. Thanks.
Thank you. We are just a few minutes away from 10 o'clock. And I think that at this point in time, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that we need a motion to move beyond 10 o'clock. So yes, thank you, Trustee Edwards. I'm wondering then if someone would be willing, Chair Morton, that the meeting move beyond 10 o'clock. Do we need a finish time, proposed finish time? No. Can I have a seconder to that? Trustee Edwards, thank you.
Just a comment. I believe there's an 11 o'clock deadline though in the bylaw, so we can only go till 11.
Good to know. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Is there anyone opposed? All right, thank you. We'll move on then to Associate Director David Wright, the draft community use of schools policy.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Community use of schools has been paused for just about the last year now, as we have focused resources on ensuring that health and safety of students and staff is our #1 priority as we make our way through the COVID-19 pandemic. We know, however, that great efforts are being made to move out of the pandemic, and we want to make sure that we are prepared to welcome the public back into DDSB facilities when we're able to do that. We are optimistic that we will be able to honor at least some of the longstanding partnerships as early as this summer. And to that end, we have reviewed and revised the policy and form of regulation, and I'm providing you this evening a draft policy and procedure that reflect the district's commitment to providing a safe and welcoming environment that is free from discrimination and harassment of students, staff, and stakeholders at any point in time while on DDSB property. I will apologize that we were not able to include the red line version highlighting the changes within the actual draft documents. We had some technical difficulties when we were preparing these updated documents, and so instead we have included the original version along with the report for comparison purposes. I don't think much has changed in terms of access to facilities or process to gain access to facilities. It has just become abundantly clear that users of DDSB space has been made abundantly clear in this updated policy and procedure that users of DDSB space must adhere to DDSB standards of acceptable behavior, particularly as it applies to equity, diversity, and inclusion. There is one piece that is not included with the report itself, and that is the application, application that will be filled out by community users on the DDSB website. We are in the process of finalizing that. So that will be available at a later time, but would be appended to the procedure just for information. I'd like to highlight that Council Cotter did the bulk of the heavy lifting on this review, spent a considerable amount of time on it, and so wanted to thank Patrick for that. And with that, the draft policy and procedure are included with your report, and I'm happy through you, Chair, to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with the Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Two questions. One is around, and I was trying to read this, but trying to read them, you know, it was quite side to side and see what the differences are. I was having difficulty, but it was more around, especially when we're talking about as we go back, we know things are not going to be actually 100% normal, et cetera, around, and where is it captured when it comes to possible increased health and safety protocols as far as that's concerned. If I know it says just a general blanket that under, you know, as far as use of following health and safety protocols, et cetera, like that, but COVID is particular, and I think we probably have some additional things that we might require people to or not have access to right now, maybe, I don't know, is that accounted for in the policy?
A really good question, given the timing, Trustee Edwards. Thanks for that. We didn't specifically highlight updated COVID protocols through this community use policy and procedure, understanding that users are obligated to follow the health and safety guidelines that we have in effect at the time, and that the policy and procedure are go forward documents. We didn't add any specificity around it. However, when we were discussing the application and what the application would look like and the attestation and the application under terms of use, there are things that we would be able to add and change over time. So it would be an active attestation that individuals would adhere to the criteria in the application. And so I think if we were going to add additional COVID measures, they would be included there. Okay,
thank you. And the second one is that because I do use a lot of our coterminous boards in my volunteer life and fill out permits, etc. And they have a fairly good online system. Are we ever going to be going to that point where users can actually go in and see what schools are available, etc., times, and what the facilities look like, and then be able to submit everything electronically for their permits? And I'm not just talking on just an application. You actually can go in and find out what gyms are available, the capacity of the gym, etc., list your uses and stuff. And so there's really very limited back and forth between the application, registering for an application or applying for a permit to actually getting one.
To be frank, we have not had conversations internally about investing in updating the community use online system to any significant extent. So as it stands right now, we intend on an electronic application, but we will maintain our community use office and officer position to help coordinate community use activities. I think it's a really interesting suggestion, certainly the way of the future, having more information online accessible to individuals when they're looking to book community use. So something we can investigate, but as of right now, there are no plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Director Marsh.
Thanks. I just wanted to flag, and I know Associate Director Wright mentioned about not having the track changes, but certainly want to make sure and draw your attention to section 5.6 of the policy, the equity, diversity, and inclusion section. Associate Director Wright did mention that, but that is completely new, and want to make sure that you don't think because we didn't provide track changes that we were not drawing your attention to that. We think it is important given our focus on human rights, but felt the need to draw your attention to it just to be sure that it was very clear that that was new.
Thank you. And Trustee Lundquist.
So this actually kind of coalesces neatly with Donna's observation, but also with Director Marsh's. So having recently gone online and dealt with that website for looking at community use of schools space, I actually am a little bit concerned that it's not accessible, so that the way the website runs actually doesn't meet AODA standards. So I do think we have to look at it. I strongly support what Donna has said, but I also think that if we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have to look at those kinds of processes, and I don't think that one will meet it.
Thanks very much for highlighting that, Trustee Lundquist. Absolutely, we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item D, that should read 2020-2021 Interim Financial Report. Associate Director Wright.
Thank you for that, Chair, and thank you for the correction. It's my pleasure this evening to welcome and introduce Jennifer Machen, Senior Finance Manager, who's joining us to present the interim financial report. But before I turn it over to Jennifer, I'd just like to highlight that we have traditionally provided trustees with first and second quarter financial update reports. Haven't necessarily provided the third quarter and then on to financial statements for the fourth, but traditionally there has been more certainty and regularity within our annual financial cycle. So it's our intention to bring forward additional interim reports if we see the financial picture is changing significantly over the coming weeks. Just to let you know, we don't feel great about the information we have right now, given the changing dynamic that we've seen this year. So with that, Jennifer, I'll turn it to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide trustees with information relating to the operating expenditures for the period ending February 28th, 2021, or Q2. Operating expenditures for the period are 48.2% of the revised estimates budget, and in the prior year, 50.8% was spent at Q2. This variance is largely due to the impact of COVID-19 and school closures on expenditures such as supply staff, staff development, school office, and transportation. There are also differences due to timing of payments and unpaid outstanding purchase orders, which impact individual lines such as school operations, transportation, and computers. This report is provided to trustees for information, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. To Trustee Edwards, go ahead, Donna.
And I know this is what happened last year, where especially in transportation, we had sort of a clawback from the ministry because a fuel clawback, if you wish, charge clawback. Are we seeing that if we do end up on a surplus in any of these particular areas, will we be asked to pay back some of that money, or it be taken out of our next budget? Per se, grants given to the boards.
Thanks for the question, Trustee Edwards. I'll start, and then if I miss something, Jennifer, we'll jump in. The ministry has already indicated that there will be a recovery of the fuel portion of the transportation allocation for some of the time that we've missed this year. But the ministry has made no indication outside of that of clawing back any of the funds from this year. In fact, the ministry has gone to pretty significant measures with the stabilization funding they provided to school boards this year to make sure that boards were quote unquote held harmless for the changes and fluctuations they've seen. So I don't think the intention at this point is to further recover funds. And generally enveloped funds are held over to the next year to be used for the purpose in which they were granted. Not often recovered outside of PPF funding, things like that. So I don't see that on the horizon, but the ministry has already indicated they will recover some of the transportation funding.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Chair Morton.
Thank you, and through you. One brief question. I'm wondering what the other non-operating expenses are that are 55.4% this year as opposed to 41.5% last year.
Jennifer?
Sure. The other non-operating includes staff on loan and some priorities and partnerships funding. So because those are all unique projects, the spending patterns tend to be quite variable year over year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So further to that, it has nothing to do with the pandemic.
We have some additional funding this year for pandemic. So some of those, the spending hasn't yet happened yet, and some were front loaded. So we spent more in the beginning of the year, but no, the variance is not as a result of the pandemic. It's just kind of the natural progression. Some of the projects, might involve buying a number of supplies or textbooks or resources at the beginning of the year, and some may be for staffing costs throughout the whole year. So it really depends on which funding sources we receive under that line.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. And seeing no further questions, so I'd like to thank Associate Director Wright and Jennifer for that presentation, and move on to E, the Student Trustee Report. I'm sure one of you will begin tonight.
I will start. Thank you, and through you, Chair. This past month, our Senate's 3 working groups have been working on awareness posts for social media and a thought exchange. The Wellbeing Working Group has been working on creating posts with mental and physical health tips and resources with helplines and websites students can go to for help. The Equity Working Group has been working on a social media campaign that focuses on defining terminology used in equity-based advocacy, while also emphasizing that creating equitable and inclusive spaces is a priority. The Student Voice Working Group has partnered with DDSB at home to create a thought exchange for students and parents. Some questions included within the thought exchange directly correlate with Student Senate as well as Student Voice. While the currently deployed thought exchange is only for DDSB at home, we're planning on having one for brick and mortar schools as well.
In line with some of our overarching Senate goals for the year, we have been in the second phase of our plan. One of our primary goals has been to increase elementary engagement, and consequently, we have been developing a social studies lesson plan for students in grade 5 and 6. This lesson allows students to learn about the election process, roles, and responsibilities of student trustees and the Student Senate. To continue our connection with elementary students, we will be hosting the second edition of the Elementary Leadership Conference on Thursday, May 20th. One of our other goals was to maintain transparency with the student body and increase outreach. As a result, we are preparing for our first Student Senate open house on Tuesday, May 25th between 5:30 and 7 p.m. This is another virtual event open to all students, staff, parents, and community members. Attendees will have the opportunity to learn about the 2020-2021 Student Senate and be able to engage with them throughout the evening. We'd love to have our trustees and staff members attend the events based on their availability.
Thank you, Arpita. The first round of the student trustee elections occurred during the first week of March, and both myself and Arpita had the opportunity to attend within our regions. This week, the second and final round of elections will be held, and we'll all be attending in our respective regions. Today, we actually had our Pickering Ajax student trustee elected, so congratulations to Kayla Malcolm from Dunbarton High School, and we look forward to seeing our incoming student trustees over the next couple days. I'm currently working with the Muslim Educators Network of Durham to put together a few different videos and challenges for the month of Ramadan, as Muslims will begin celebrating at the start of next week. With representatives from every single high school in Durham contributing, it's rewarding to see how widespread diversity is within our region. The character trait for April is honesty. And I think that fits very well because we all honestly need this April break, and we truly deserve it after all these relentless months of work that we have been putting in together. With that, thank you all, and we welcome any questions you may have.
I'm seeing no questions, so I'd like to thank Logan, Arpita, and Aaliyah for their presentation. Moving on to item 10, committee reports, and call on Trustee Patrice Barnes to give the Equity and Diversity Ad Hoc Committee meeting report.
Thank you. I honestly support her views about April break. Okay, Equity and Diversity Report is founded on page 89 to 93. It was listed in the package if any trustees have any questions.
Seeing none, Trustee Barnes.
Sorry, I didn't finish talking. I just muted myself.
Oh, sorry.
Anyways, focus were on the feedback with the student senate sessions, which were really good conversations that were facilitated by our student trustees, and the community feedback on the Black Compendium. We're working on parental update to the compendium, but other than that, everything else is listed in the report. And if there's any questions, I can take it.
Seeing no questions, thank you, Trustee Barnes. I see there is no correspondence on the agenda tonight, but before I adjourn the meeting, I'd just like to remind trustees that Chair Morton will be calling a special board meeting to deal with our recommended action. So don't go away. As there is no further business, this meeting will now adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. I don't think there is any need for us to take a break. I'm looking at our clock and it says 10:18, so we will proceed immediately with a special board meeting. I will call that meeting to order. We have an agenda, a very brief one in front of us. Are there any declarations of interest?
Chair Morton?
Yes. Yes.
There's a process. If you want to call a special board meeting, you have to get unanimous consent for that. I would suggest you ask that question first to make sure we're legal and then roll into your board meeting. So.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would object to moving into a special board meeting at the present time? Seeing no objection, then I would call this meeting to order. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, could I have a motion to approve the very brief agenda? Thank you, Trustee Lundquist, seconded by Trustee Forbes. All in favor? Thank you. We do have a recommended action. And that recommended action was brought forward in our standing committee. I'm going to go to Vice Chair Christine Thatcher to speak to that resolution, please.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I confirm that a motion was brought forward by Trustee Lundquist and a resolution was adopted by the committee. I would ask that staff put the resolution up for the members to see. Thank you, Rob. I would move that the board adopt the resolution.
Would you like to read that for us, please, Trustee Thatcher?
Yes, I think I can. So I move that the DDSB, through its chair, immediately correspond with Dr. Kyle and the Durham Public Health, imploring them to prioritize the immunization of school staff and staff engaged in the direct transport of students, and that copies of that correspondence be provided to the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health and the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province of Ontario. So now I would move that the board adopt the resolution.
Thank you for that. Could we take that written motion down, please, so that I could see hands? Thank you. Could I have somebody second that motion, please? Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Further questions or comments? Seeing none. This time I will simply ask, is there anyone who opposes this motion? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no one in opposition, this motion has passed. Thank you kindly. If there is no further business, consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.